I'd like to call the meeting to order. I think we have everybody we need. Shelley came here and got us in quorum. Morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's budget meeting, pardon me. I'd like to ask for any declarations of conflict of interest. There's none. I'd like to move a motion. We could put up on the screen. I'd like to acknowledge to the public that things were a little later than we would have liked them to have been. And it doesn't make it better, but it was late for us too. We received our materials late. Everybody's doing their best. So our goal is that if you showed up today and you tell us before 10 a.m., so you've got 20 minutes to go, that you'd like to register and give a deputation, we'd be very pleased to hear from you. Normally, you would have had to have registered the day before. And see Andrew? So the gentleman to my right, second person to my right, is the person that you should speak to. And please don't hesitate to come up during the meeting and give him your name and any written deputation that you might have. So I have to have a 2/3 vote in favor of this deputation motion. All in favor? Done. Now I'd like to invite the Chief Executive Officer, Rick Leary, to provide some introductory remarks, and that'll lead to a presentation by staff about the operating budget.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. In a few minutes, our CFO, Joyce Levita, will present to you the TTC's proposed 2020 operating capital budgets for your consideration. But before she does, I'd like to highlight a few of the things that, for those of you and everyone watching, quite a bit of work has gone into modernizing the TTC and making it one of the best transit properties in North America. Before you today is a budget that continues that work. It preserves the great gains we've made through the hard work of employees, this board, with the support of City Council and Mayor Tory. As you will hear, the recommended budget preserves all the services the TTC currently offers, including those improvements delivered over the past 5 years. Things like the 10-minute or better network, expansions to Express Bus and Blue Night services, capacity improvements on surface and subway networks, near elimination of short turns, the 2-hour transfer, and Kids Ride Free initiative. But it's about more than just preserving service. It's about enhancing service and doing better. It's about working smarter. It's about being more inclusive and responding to the reports from the city's ombudsman and auditor general. It's about making significant improvements to service reliability on our surface routes, and it's about preparing the TTC for future demands in new service like Line 5, Eglinton Crosstown. Every year, we face built-in pressures and cost of living increases for things like fuel, electricity, and labor, all just to preserve what we have. Today, I'm recommending we move beyond just preserving services. At a time of increased growth and increased demand from a growing population, we need to respond in a way that supports our customers while being financially practical. You will see in this report our recommendations to fully fund 128,000 hours of new service and hiring 121 operators to address our more than 24 of our busiest routes in areas where people are heavily reliant on buses, to make improvements at the Wheel-Trans call center as well, to put an end to the unreasonable wait times our customers have had to endure. You will see new funding to address the Ombudsman's recommendation regarding inclusivity and equity through new training programs and the implementation of an anti-racism strategy and a new complaints process. You will see proposed funding to respond to the Auditor General's findings around fare evasion, which I talked about last Thursday at the board meeting, with the hiring of 50 additional revenue protection staff, bringing in more constables. But you'll also see a plan to pay for these new services, and you'll see where we found approximately $30 million of savings and efficiencies. But the fact remains, enhanced services for our customers do come at a cost. Our proposed operating budget for next year is $2.14 billion, an increase of $85 million, or 4.1% over 2019. We have identified 3 ways to help pay for this increase, however, through revenue protection measures and cost recovery service charges related to Metrolinx construction, through an increase in the city subsidy, as well as through a 10-cent increase in all fares except adult cash. So with that, I would like to introduce to you Ms. Levita and ask her if she'd give her first presentation on the TTC budget. So thank you, Josie.
Thank you, Rick. Good morning, Vice Chair, Commissioners, colleagues, and the visiting public. So I'm going to be spending a bit of time walking you through both the operating budget as well as our recommended 10-year capital budget and plan, and providing you with an overview and some of the highlights. Okay. So before I outline those highlights for 2020, I would like to take a few moments to provide you with the results of our prior year investments, and essentially that sets the context for 2020. So just to remind you, since 2015, we've had various new and enhanced services added to our repertoire. TYSSE opened, we've added to our network, both in terms of expansion and our 10-minute network, our bus network, bringing bus service to Sunday morning earlier, as well as restoring service reductions that had happened previous to 2015. In 2018 and 19, over about $30 billion were provided to help us improve our service reliability. We have seen capacity improvements on our Line 1, as well as dealing with crowding. We've also seen a restoration back to our standards with bringing in 169 operators that have helped to reduce overtime. And finally, we have seen improvements in reliability that has allowed us to actually achieve some significant improvements. We have also taken steps to improve our inclusion and accessibility. With these various concessions and actions, we've ensured that we have provided the ability for various people to enjoy our riders with various options that we have ensured that we've made it much more accessible service. About $42 million have been provided to deal with these concessions, and then there's been the ongoing implementation of Presto that's funded about $27 million. So in 2018, as you can see from this map, some of the improvements that were made are identified here. So the green lines essentially identify areas where express routes were extended. The pink lines are where we've added to peak period service, and the light pink, which was mostly in the east side, has allowed us to increase service in that area. As well, we've seen improvements from 2019, essentially through the entire TTC network. So given these investments, what's really happened? We can say that we have seen demonstrable and measurable results, and we've been better able to deliver the service that we advertise, allowing us to increase our service reliability and resiliency. What we have been able to achieve is 100% scheduled capacity on our surface vehicles. As well, we've seen significant improvements on Line 1 and Line 2. And from these charts, what you can see here is that we have exceeded our 2018 performance, as identified by the gray line across the chart. And in the most recent months, we've also seen us exceeding in our 2019 target, and in fact reaching 100%, particularly on Line 2. As well, we've seen significant reduction in our vehicle short turns. On the bus system, that's been reduced by 48%, especially since June, which is the left chart. And on the right chart, you can see that our streetcar short turns have been reduced by 65%, and that's been since May. And finally, our key accomplishments as a result of the investment made in 169 additional operators has significantly reduced our overtime and operator hours. It's allowed us to provide the advertised levels of service. It's eliminated our service cancellations, and we've been able to reduce our overtime spending by 7%, or $21 million, since April of 2018. So with that as a backdrop, we set out to approaching the 2020 budget on the basis of identifying what are those key service objectives that we intend to achieve, what are those outcomes that we are looking for, and use these as our guiding principles, both for 2020, but really to the end of the term of council. So starting from the left top, I think our key number one priority is to ensure that our transit service is more seamless and reliable, and that we essentially improve customer service experience and satisfaction. We want to become a more inclusive and accessible organization and service provider. It is important that we continue to look at transforming how we do business so we can solidify TTC as a financially sustainable and efficient system. And finally, we need to prepare for the future. We need to innovate to ensure that we are resilient and that we can make transit the mobility mode of choice. This not only contributes to that ultimate objective, but also to meeting the city's broader mobility, economic, and social objectives as well. So let me just provide you a high-level overview of the numbers. So if you look at the very last column to your right, what we are seeing here for the 2020 budget is our revenues increasing by 4.4%, or just over $1.3 billion. Our expenses are going up by 4.1%, or $2.144 billion. And our net expenditure, otherwise known as the request to the city for funding, is $790 million, which represents a 3.5% increase in city funding. We have base budget amount that maintains, preserves the services and the achievements that I've just outlined, and we're also asking for $9.5 million for new improvements. Our positions are going up by 216, and mostly 121 of those are for operators, another 50 to help with our revenue protection recovery program, and 11 for our TEO and anti-racism strategy. Next slide. So I'd like to take a few minutes really outlining how those key service objectives have guided us in setting the priority actions that we took and that we are recommending today, because these are the ones that we'll be using to achieve our intended outcomes. So when we think about our customer satisfaction, we want to ensure that we're preserving those service levels and recent improvements that I've highlighted previously. We want to ensure that we are going to sustain the service standard accomplishments that we made in 2019, and that will give us an additional 88 operators for us to be able to deliver the services that we advertise. We want to be able to ensure that the reliability continues and that we have flexibility in the system to be able to respond. And finally, that we continue with our Presto implementation, most notably with the announcement that we are stop selling our tickets and tokens on November 30th. And finally, what we have also recommended is the year one improvements identified in the service plan that you considered on Thursday. And that will allow us to have 33 more operators that will give us the ability to bring local and express bus services on Jane, Finch East, Dufferin, Islington, Eglinton Avenue East to Kingston Road, just as a start. And by September 2020, we will be able to add 20 a.m. and 30 p.m. buses to regular permanent service. Our 2020 budget, it continues to focus on ensuring that we are moving forward with our family of services model. This allows us to increase our accessibility of our TTC stations, so we have greater travel options and spontaneity of travel for our customers. We have also added to this budget funding to allow us to implement an anti-racism strategy in concert with the City of Toronto staff, and particularly in implementing the anti-Black racism action strategy of the city. We're establishing the independent office for complaints as recommended by the Ombudsman. And finally, we are putting some funding in to allow us to improve our call wait times during peak periods. Solidifying our fiscal foundation is another key priority. Without that, we need to ensure that we can be stabilized for the future. So a series of actions were taken here as well. They're outlined here. When you take the combination of all but the last two, They are providing us with $31.6 million in sustainable funding and sustainable savings. Implementing Auditor General recommendations, investing in our materials and procurement capacity, share services with the city in which we've been able to reduce our diesel fuel contracts, and looking at a series of measures that think about how we do business differently. As mentioned by the CEO, we are also ensuring that we are recovering costs from both Metrolinx, an agency for which we are providing service during construction of the Eglinton and Finch lines, and that we have revenue protection initiatives to help recover funding or fair revenue that is not being captured. And finally, we are including funding in here to continue a business transformation program so we can identify new opportunities and future savings. Finally, in terms of system resiliency, we need to look to the future and prepare for it. We are recommending here a 5-year fare policy and a 10-year fare collection strategy. We need to think about how we are charging our fares, what that structure looks like, and what is the right solution that we have to collect those revenues. In conjunction with the city and Vision 2.0, we are doing a review of our mid-block stops. And finally, we're starting the initial planning for the Eglinton LRT operation. So when we think about the revenue side, you've heard from us through this year that ridership revenue in 2019 is below budget, but actually service demand is high. And so this particular chart is giving you a sense of what is actually happening. The red bars that you see in this chart actually represent the vehicle boardings. And so that, in fact, is continually to increase. The blue bars are the ridership revenue. And so what we're seeing is a change in the measured ridership, primarily because we see a transition in Presto. So we're moving from MetroPass to ePurse, and some of the fare policy changes that have been implemented, such as the 2-hour transfer. But essentially what this chart is telling you is that ridership revenue is not keeping pace with the combined effect of service demand and cost escalation. However, in this budget, we have recommended a 1% growth value in ridership. What we are seeing is that there is an uptick, and it's pretty consistent with employment growth trend. And so we have included about $14 million in the budget to address that. So the next few slides sets out really the details, but I'm not going to go through all of them. I think the key points here, if you look on the net column, which is the second in from the right, that we had $82 million just in base budget pressure. So without really doing anything else, we're dealing with prior year funding strategies in which we had one-time solutions. We have to acknowledge and include, of course, the collective bargaining increases, as well as the inflationary costs of doing business. When you add to that our need to preserve the services that we have an additional amount of money there, just below that, and together that's $101 million.
We're going to do
With $31.6 million in savings, that's brought it down to almost $70 million. And when we've adjusted for our revenue sources, we're at $75 million. So as I mentioned, there's $31.6 million in budget reductions and efficiency savings that we have achieved. In last year's budget, we saw a $15 million use on a one-time basis of our stabilization reserve, as well as a $24 million reduction, a one-time reduction. It was an unspecified one. And of that, we've been able to manage on a sustainable basis all but $27 million. So from a sustainability perspective, these measures actually replace that $27 million. The only item that's listed here that is not sustainable is a $2.6 million one-time unspecified reduction, but it's tied to 2 new requests that are one-time. So for next year, as those one-time requests come off, the funding comes off, that will replace the one-time savings that we'll have to achieve. However, really to note in this list is that we have looked at everything, I think is what the message is here. So investments in capital has actually brought down our costs due to vehicle renewal. We have looked at our base budget and identified all expenses for which we could reduce on an ongoing basis. We have examined and implemented AG recommendations to give us savings there. And we've looked at how we are delivering our services in a different way that's identified in the efficiency measures. Finally, the other key area, which I won't go through again, but essentially these are the requests for new funding that we have identified of $9.5 billion. And so the first one is the year one of the service plan implementation, and the others I've already identified. So that together brings our budget to $84.7 million over last year. So how are we funding that? Essentially, there are three measures that we're taking. One, which is the blue segment, is to recover from those who are not paying. So a combination of two actions, one around revenue protection and the other around recovering our costs, will provide us with just over $26 million. We are recommending a 10-cent fare increase for all but adult cash. This is not an easy decision to make, but we feel that we need a contribution from our riders as well. And finally, city funding is almost $27 million, and that represents a 3.5% increase. So how will we recover our costs? So to the left, we're outlining are the beginnings of our strategy. We plan to take a data-driven, risk-based approach. That means that we are looking at our Presto data, we are looking at what is happening on the street, and we'll be focusing resources, new resources, for which we're requesting 50 new officers to help target the areas for which we feel that there is fare evasion. We take this very seriously. And so we feel that it's very important that we take all actions possible, including we will be able to close our fare lines in our subways, and that will help us recover our costs. So what we have in this budget is essentially $10 million of recouped revenue that we're projecting, for which $3 million of it will be paying for the additional resources that we will be applying to this strategy. On the right-hand side, we've also included $19.4 million for recovery from Metrolinx for costs that we have incurred for incremental bus service during construction delays. This is a contractual obligation for them to fund. We have been billing them since 2017. However, we have not received recoveries since that period of time. As well, we have started to provide service on Finch West for the same purposes. So the $19.4 billion reflects both the costs for 2020 for Eglinton as well as Finch. So the increase in the fare, as we've recommended here, is a 10% fare increase effective March 1st. There is no increase proposed on adult cash fare, and we expect that to generate $31.4 million. As I just said, this has been a difficult decision for us, and we understand that this will be an affordability issue for some of our riders. However, we feel we need to preserve the services that we have, the improvements that we've made to date, and ensure that we can fund the concessions that we offer. And finally, to our city funding partner. The city has made substantial investments in transit, and what we see since 2014 is a total of $216 million, or a 40% increase from that period, which is an average of $43 million, or 7%. And for 2020, we will be requesting 26.9, or a 3.5% increase, understanding that the city is also facing financial challenges. Looking forward to 2021 and 22, what we're projecting is just over $100 million for 2021 and almost $70 million for 2022. The two key things to note which is just under the economic factors, the second line, collective bargaining, that this only represents funding to get us to March 31st of 2021 as the contract expires thereafter. So we have not included a forecast for any additional funding beyond that period. And finally, when you look down to the operating impact of capital area, based on the planned schedule of the opening of the Eglinton LRT, we are forecasting the cost of operating and maintaining the new system at approximately $64 million over the 2 years. Okay, I'm going to switch gears a little and take you through our 10-year capital plan. So we've spent time talking about the costs to deliver our services. Let me now talk a little bit about the capital investments that we require for TTC's assets that support those services. Starting with our capital investment plan, why have one? Well, it helps provide a clear view of the required capital investments over the next 15 years. It ensures that we have an increased focus on our base state of good repair and growth projects, provides a distinction between what's funded and not funded so we understand the value of investing and the risks of failing to invest, and of course it's a multi-year planning tool. So this year's capital investment plan, which has been updated from last year, is $36.1 billion. That reflects a $2.6 billion increase from 2019. When you look to the left side, you can see how it's broken down by mode. And when you look at subway line 1 and 2, combined, that represents about 56% of the entire value over the 15 years. When we look at it by category, which is on the right-hand side, if you combine our state of good repair, our legislative, and our health and safety projects, which essentially is some form of state of good repair, that represents about just over 63%, or $23 billion. Our service improvements are about $10.3 billion, and our growth projects represent about $3 billion. So let's talk a little bit about what's funded and not funded. So I ask that you watch this chart. So we're trying to show you how this works. So if you look at the line, the colors here, that represents the funding of our 10-year capital plan, which is $7.4 billion. When you add the portion in the 10 years that's not funded, that's an additional $19.6 billion that we could not fit in. When you extend the same funding sources that we have today into the outer 5 years, that would allow us to fund an additional $2.6 billion. And therefore, that leaves another $6.4 billion unfunded. So in total, what this shows you is that based on current funding sources, $10 billion of the $36 billion would be funded, but another $26 billion would not. So let's talk a little bit about what is funded. So the 10-year capital plan that's before you establishes a steady state of good repair maintenance program so that we can plan and anticipate what's coming over the next 10-year period. We have ensured that all in-flight projects are fully funded so that they may be completed. That includes things like finishing off the ATC Line 1, some station renewals, and of course adding the Young Bloor capacity improvement project. We have maximized our funding for vehicle overhaul programs given the limited funding for purchases. We have funded planning and studies so we can advance those capital initiatives that are not currently funded so that progress can be made. And finally, we are looking to establish and strengthen our enterprise asset management practices in preparation for legislative requirements. So in providing an overview here, you can see that the 10-year capital plan by mode can be split between our infrastructure and our vehicles, with it predominantly being allocated to our infrastructure, representing just over $6 billion of the $7.4 billion. When you look at how it's split out by category, clearly state of good repair, the green segment, is our focus. And in fact, when you pull the Young Bloor Capacity Improvement Project out of that equation, our state of good repair actually goes up to just over 81%. So just to give you a bit of a profile over the 10-year period, the blue line reflects what the 10-year capital plan was last year. We have smoothed that out based on our reforecasting. We've tried to align our cash flows based on stage gating and our spending capacity. And so the red line now reflects our base capital program. When you add the Young Bloor project, which is the green line, you get the total $7.4 billion capital plan. Splitting that out by our infrastructure projects, again, the blue line is last year and the red line is the plan this year. It represents $6.2 billion. It represents the majority of our state of good repair work, including the Young Bloor capacity improvements, easier access, fire ventilation, ATC, and all kinds of major tract work, bridges, tunnels, systems, and such. When you look at our vehicle segment of the capital plan, the blue line last year saw the back part of it higher than the front. And what we're seeing now with the red line is essentially the acceleration of our vehicle overhaul program to the closer to the front of the plan, given our limited funding. What this does is it allows us to complete our LRV and our e-bus procurements. However, there is no new procurement in this plan. We've been able to fund our T1 life extension to 30 years only, and therefore about half of the funding required to extend to 40 years is not available, and there is no funding in there for purchases. So how are we funding this 10-year plan? To the right, very right of this chart, we've identified all the funding sources associated. Firstly, $5.9 billion, which is our base program. City funding through debt issuance is about $2.9 billion. Provincial and federal funding for existing programs is another 2.3 for the city and 2.9 for federal and provincial funding. When you add funding for the Young Bloor Capacity Improvement Program of $1.5 billion, we have another $500 million coming to us through the city, with the other two shares coming from the provincial and federal government. The province, with the federal government announcing its PTIF 2 funding and assumed funding from the provincial government as well. So what is also reflected here is the replacement of the extra 2 cents of provincial gas tax that we lost as part of the provincial announcement, as well as the ending of the PTIF 1 program through the e-bus procurement. So on a one-year basis, which is the capital budget, and this is the amount that council allocates funding to, you can see just kind of again the breakdown of what that looks like. Infrastructure at 78% funding and 22% for vehicles, almost $1 billion being spent in this year. And to your right, you see this by category, with predominantly most of the funding going to state of good repair at almost 75%. So let's talk a little bit about what's not funded. So we look in the 10 years. This is what the $19.6 billion that we are not able to fund. There are some property purchases to help us plan for the future, some of our new facilities that we've had to put below the line. The blue group, which represents over $1 billion, is the amount of funding for a vehicle overhaul program that we could not fund. And then we see the balance of the subway infrastructure state of good repair funding of almost $800 million that also sits below the line, along with another $17 billion of other projects. So let's talk a little bit about our needs. So I think you've heard all of us say that line 2 is a focus for us. It's been a priority, particularly given the age of it of being over 50 years old. We have also, and so it's not just about the ATC, it's also about the liners and the track and the traction power So it's a full program of work for which we would identify the need for funding. For our SRT, there's funding in this capital plan only to extend the life to 2026, and that's still based on the original assumption that it was to be replaced by the Scarborough Subway Extension Project. And Line 1, well, we have funding in, and our ATC work is underway. There is still work to be done for our fire ventilation, asbestos, and also for trains for growth. When we think about our vehicle needs, this table here identifies those vehicle requirements that are currently not in the plan. So on our subway system, we do need another 18 trains to help us on Line 1 to accommodate ridership growth. In terms of our buses, in 2022, we project that we need to replace buses that are 18 years old with a need for 345 buses, and then a program is identified in the following years. Similarly, with our wheel trans, we need to ensure that we have a replacement program for those, and we can add some capacity there. And finally, for our streetcars, we identify an additional 60 streetcars that are required also to accommodate growth. With these, also require facilities so that we can accommodate the extra fleet. Finally, what are our next steps? So our next CIP update is going to be a key input to the city to help support our intergovernmental discussions to secure new partnership funding. As we finish this process, we will be getting an initial priority setting process that will be driven by 3 core values, focusing on safety and security, accessibility and sustainability. And we need to ensure that our project, that we identify all project interdependencies so we can manage risk and realize benefits. These recommended capital investment priorities will be reported to the board in advance of the 2021 budget process, and it will form the basis of TTC's advice to City Council. When the City Manager, in consultation with our CEO, reports back on the direction from Council to identify the funding and financing options for the reallocation of funds previously approved, identified, or contemplated, which are in the order of about $5.1 billion for the provincial priority projects and for the purposes of state of good repair of the TTC subway network and the expansion projects. I believe I can say on behalf of all my colleagues at the TTC that we feel that the state of good repair investments are a necessary prerequisite to achieving benefits of further TTC network trans expansion. And with that, Vice Chair, that concludes my...
Thanks very much. I think the CEO has some remarks, and then we'll get to deputations.
All right, thank you, Josie, and thank you to all of your staff for all the hard work on this. That was good. I would like to say that, again, I'm going to just make a few statements. I know that fare increases are never popular because I do hear it from our customers over the course of this last weekend. But I hope that you've seen today that this budget is about more than just preserving service that we have today. It's about a promise to be responsible stewards of both the public's money and the revenues we collect from our customers and giving you more and better service. We do this by ensuring that everyone pays their share. We do this by ensuring that the TTC is a welcoming and free in discrimination. We do this by delivering service as advertised. We do that by improving and enhancing the service we have today and bringing more reliable and more frequent service to all parts of the city. And we do that by preparing the TTC to take on new challenges and opportunities in the coming years. This budget lays the foundation for all of those things, as well as, I would say, supports our commitments within our corporate plan. We intend to transform for financial sustainability. We prefer to enable our employees to succeed. We move more customers more reliably. We intend to make more public transit seamless, and we want to innovate for the long term. I hope that we can get your support today, and I welcome any comments that people have following the deputations. And before I give it back to you, Chair, I would like to make one other further statement, and that is I just want to take a moment and recognize one of the senior members of the TTC team, John O'Grady, our Chief Safety Officer. John, if you just stand for a second, please. This is John's last meeting with the Commission, He's retiring after 21 years with the TTC, and John's been responsible for all the development and implementation of various safety-related policies and programs to keep our customers and our employees safe. And just on a personal note, I'm going to let you know I'm going to miss him terribly. I knew John's name before I even came to the TTC. He is one of the most respected safety individuals in all of North America. So with that, John, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Rick. I just wanted to say it's been a real privilege to serve the people of Toronto in this capacity for the last 20 years. And I look forward to being retired and still riding the system every day. So thank you very much.
With that, I'll give it back to you, Vice Chair.
Well, the way we're going to proceed this morning is we're going to have deputations on the operating budget, and then we will have questions from members of the board concerning the operating budget, and then we'll do the same with capital budget. I would say we only have 2 people overlapping the deputations, which is good, and I'd ask those who have overlapping deputations to be as economical with time as they can be. So, Mr. Yule, do you have any pearls of wisdom for us? Maybe not.
2 months ago, I told this board that the budget deputation was already done. It was long completed before the budget was posted. Well, 95% of that is actually irrelevant, and I could have spent my time telling you I told you so, but I decided to take a different tact. During last week's meeting, there were comments in the CEO's report that no one commented or seemed to notice, namely the less than stellar sales of Metro passes. This is from the report. The slow return of heavy transit users to Metro Pass, now Presto Period Pass, is mainly due to the introduction of 2-hour transfers in August of 2018. I find this explanation highly suspect because in July of 2018, Presto sales were down 6%, and that was a month before time-based transfers went into service. Ridership is down because Metro Pass sales are down. This is from their report. July 18, Metro Pass sales account for 45% of total ridership.
Mr. Yule, this is a good critique of the CEO report.
No, this is relevant to our
Okay, if you get at the operating budget, I think you may be, but tie it up with that too, please.
What is the monthly pass sales now? Monthly pass sales are down because we charge too much. This is the 3rd time I've told this board that our Metro Pass sales, our Metro Pass return on investment price is too high. It's 48.76 trips. The national average is 34.21. That's across 24 agencies. Staff will say, well, not all these 24 agencies have LRTs or metros. That's true, but 6 of them do, and the average of those is even lower than the national average. People will say that, well, these are not all Ontario agencies, and they don't have the same provincial funding restraints. That is equally true, but that's even lower than the average before. When the official fare policy of the TTC and this board then riders feel more justified in not paying their fare and stealing rides when they can. It's sad, but that's true. A 10-cent fare increase is a 19th century reaction to a 21st century reality. With Presto, there is no reason why a fare price has to end with a nickel or a dime. It could just as easily be $3.16 or $3.17. Frequent users are getting hosed, while infrequent users see no fare increase again. Cash fare should be $4. The e-fare should be $3.16. For the record, Brampton Transit has $4 cash and $3.10 on Presto. We also need to look at wasteful spending on the TTC. This was posted on Friday. It's a career and education advisor. This is from the description to provide one-on-one career and educational counseling for staff and union employees. It pays $66,000 to $660.60 to $83,000 a year. Most of the key functions of this position can be handled under Google search. In full disclosure, I have applied to the TTC in the past, and I don't meet their qualifications, and that's not why I'm bringing this up. In 2020, the TTC wants to raise my fare by 10 cents a trip and also wants to spend $83K on basically a guidance counselor for bus drivers. I know lots of very intelligent bus, subway, and streetcar drivers, and even a bunch of TTC supervisors. Unfortunately, their response to this hearing of this posting are not exactly repeatable in such an august room. By the way, board members could have been more aware of this budget's contents before Friday if they had not voted to discontinue the budget committee. After all, 6 deputations across 3 years of its existence must be far too arduous for city politicians to endure. Thank you.
Economical. Do I have any questions for Mr. Yule from the board? Councillor Carroll.
Yes, I'm interested in your comments on the fare increase and possibly changing the formula. Is your assertion we should go back to the old process where we looked at 2 or 3 options in advance of the budget process and then, you know, had a chance to comment on whether or not we wanted to go with the cash fare going up or vice versa, where the commission really had time to deliberate on that specifically?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I would agree with that. We need to make an informed decision on things.
Sorry about this. Oh, sorry about that.
We need to make an informed decision as a community, not just as a board, as a last-minute decision.
Right, so people would have been able to come and depute on that specifically. You know, if you're going to do a fare increase, how then? So we could have had that discussion of shall we go with the cash fare and correct the MetroPass problem?
Yeah, I would agree with that, because right now, once you figure out, cash is the most expensive form of fare collection we have.
Yeah.
The nickel difference between the 2 items, it's actually costing us more to take a cash fare from a customer at $3.25 than it does to take a Presto fare at $3.20.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Yule. If I could have Mr. Wilson, Hamish Wilson. Okay, thanks. No, you were very brief. I appreciate it. Mr. Wilson, you have 5 minutes.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for being here. Things have been a bit chaotic from the way that Mr. Ford has turned things over, so I appreciate that you haven't been able to be on top of everything as you'd like to be there for the delay in getting the budget out. It's somewhat understandable because it's been really hectic in terms of all of the things you've been having to cope with. Thank you. However, it still didn't really feel that good to have the news come out on a Friday afternoon, but whatever. Please try and allocate some blame back to Mr. Ford, please, or a lot of it. It's a very huge system. It's a very large city. I almost think we need an 8% property tax hike this year just to make up for the lost time and the austerity. It's really got to be changed, because looking at that mountain of debt that's coming, or the expense that's coming, and the state of everything, we've got so many expenses. So I would hope that we would have advocates for expanding the transit advocacy beyond containment. Even though I think many of you are advocates, I think at council we need to really be pushing to make sure that we have real strong advocates for the user pay, for the major problem that we have, one of the major problems that we have in the city, the lack of charge for the mobile furnaces. They are the major evader of their fair share, quite honestly. The number of cars that come in and clog our streets without actually paying for their costs, it's really unfair. They take a lot of space, both when moving and when parked. That equates to the costs of time to our transit users. And there's a lot of land, there's a lot of heat pollution, there's a lot of extra cost to the healthcare system that transit does not contribute to. So to really actually have equity in our mobility, I really hope that the councillors will actually advocate for a strong vehicle registration tax of $300 each vehicle this coming year. That's a lot of money. It's a big shock to many, and cars are expensive to own and operate, but to really be fair to transit riders and taxpayers, we need that sort of infusion and charge to the motor vehicles. I would suggest to make that sort of jump fair to the motorists and politically acceptable, you actually have a very targeted destination for the funds of, say, $100 million for the road repairs, because you may not necessarily see all the road conditions, but they're really in rough shape. As a cyclist, it's like, whoa. The traffic enforcement and it has been deadly. I hope you've been seeing in the papers recently all the issues about traffic enforcement. $50 million for the traffic enforcement. The TTC is not contributing to the death and the harm rate of citizens of Toronto. And then say $150 million for the TTC, $50 million for operating, $100 million for capital, perhaps. That's the sort of equity that we need. That's the sort of approach that we need. Because I've shared in past meetings just how well subsidized the cars are, relatively speaking, and it's a host of hidden car subsidies. Hiking the fares is not the way to go. We are in a climate crisis. I would say that if Council is able to declare a climate emergency and is beyond a climate emergency to climate chaos and breakdown now, given the momentum, you also should be able to make a motion here to have that 300 vehicle worth of charge. It is a climate crisis or a car crisis. So do not hike the fares unless, please make a motion to actually put in a 300 vehicle registration tax. And it's also more fair to have that sort of approach to the taxpayers of Toronto and the homeowners, because now there are many homeowners, or some, that do not have cars, and yet if they're being asked to pay for all these extra costs, it's not entirely fair. In terms of, let's see, oh yes, another thing about equity as well. The federal level has been really supportive of transit, and that's been wonderful. I think to give them continuing fare hikes, or to give us continuing fare hikes, if they've put in $1 billion over the last, 3-4 years, I don't think they really appreciate having little hikes. And we are at a very high user pay already with the transit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Wilson? No? Thanks a lot, sir. Mr. Rosenfeld? Morning, sir.
Hello. I haven't done this in a while, so it's a different set of faces. Some of them are similar in other places.
Well, it's nice to
welcome
see you
all.
again.
You were here, Alan, before. My name is Herman Rosenfeld. I'm speaking as a member of TTC Riders. I ride public transit all the time when I'm not riding my bike. And yes, I do drive once in a while, but what can I say? Regarding the operation budget document, I was unpleasantly surprised to see two very problematic proposals which juxtaposed don't look all that well. One is some of the people who just spoke as a 10-cent fare increase. Second was the proposed hiring of 50 new what you call transit enforcement officers. In other words, transit cops. The two things seem like rather too problematic and rather backward steps for transit users, and not the way to move forward towards some of the lofty goals articulated in the beginning of the document, and I don't mean to say that you're hypocritical about them. We all share those. It seems that instead of stabilizing and ultimately lowering the cost for transit users, we're concentrating on increasing their costs and punishing and disciplining those who can't pay. While not increasing adult cash fares is a good thing, I can understand why that's done, because a lot of adult cash fares are the interspaces where people with low incomes access the system, and that's a good thing. The overall increase is retrograde in other ways. It increases the costs across the board, including senior fares, and if you look down that list of Appendix C, it increases for everybody else. The $32 million can be raised in other ways, and I know this is not a money-raising body, and there's big problems in the capital budget because there's unfunded things, and I'm not saying you should be unfunded around this, but there are other ways to raise this. We need to stabilize and ultimately lower fares. The percentage of fares that we rely on, it's not the way to go for a public transit, particularly in this era of a climate crisis. No matter how articulately and problematically people raise it, it's real and it's going to impinge upon us more and more. It's a good thing that the mayor is finally raising property taxes, but the fact that austerity has been upon us for long, and remember, a couple of us, we argued about this over the years, that it hasn't been raised in a long time means that it's overdue. But why should the transit system pay for that? In general, if you look at this, it looks sort of bad. And while the one hand is raising the cost to users, policing is increased. That's pretty backwards. It exacerbates the cause of the problem and punishes those who react. And I'm not talking about people who are criminals. That's really not the main way that this is going on. It's backwards and it's sort of dumb. But it's not just dumb, it's deaf. Because if you look across North America and across transit systems, that people are rebelling against this kind of thing. Not huge masses of people, but the sizable minorities of people who are having trouble paying for them. You know what's happened in New York City, where you had thousands of people protesting, jumping over turnstiles and this kind of stuff, as individuals, but collectively. And in other countries in Latin America, this kind of strategy ain't going to work. It's the Bloomberg strategy towards crime, which didn't work in New York City, and it's not going to work here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
You're welcome.
Okay, Mr. Morozov. Michael Morozov. Morning, sir. You have 5 minutes.
If that's okay.
Sure.
Everyone can hear me okay?
Yep, we're good.
Thank you for giving me the time to speak to you today. So I'm coming to you this morning on the 11th hour as we believe the Toronto Transit Commission and the City of Toronto is about to make a $150 million mistake. To give you some background, my name is Michael Morozov, and I'm president and CEO of a company called Orem. We're one of the largest service providers to the TTC today, which includes janitorial services, window cleaning, high elevation services, and so forth. When I started my industry, I saw it as a very archaic and dormant industry that saw very little to no innovation. Now, in 8 years, we have grown our company into the largest player in Canada by pushing boundaries and finding innovations. A few weeks ago, similar to our industry, we saw another TTC service that's seen little to no innovation. My executive team and I began exploring accessible transit as a way of continuing the model of providing efficiencies for the TTC. For full transparency, our company has been preparing a tender submission, which is actually due tomorrow. As we began reading through the tender documents, there were a lot of head-scratching moments. I want to make it clear, I come from a service-based industry where the mentality of your house, your rules. I'll play by your rules. We've been complying
So our rules are, this is the operating budget, right? And I'm okay with you to make a pitch.
I'm not making a pitch.
Well, okay, it sounds like a pitch,
No,
which
no,
I'm
it's not
fine
making
with.
a pitch
I just
whatsoever.
want to get to the operating budget.
We've been complying with all the prerequisites, even though in our mind they're grossly outdated and promote inefficiencies. We have met with the heads of Wheel-Trans. To give you some context, our executive team consists of very talented individuals from the finance, operation, and IT sectors. This includes our executive vice president, David DeVries, who's a 25-year military vet. His responsibility included managing the military assets. Afterwards, he organized the logistics of both the Invictus and Pan Am Games. He was also the fleet manager for Hydra One, 79 assets, including helicopters and vehicles. The reason I'm saying all of this is not to give you I'm not selling myself for asking for a badge of honor. It is to showcase that we had a very talented team look at the tender documents. I must be honest, I come from the private sector and never really worked in the public sector. And sometimes in the private sector, they're just bad deals. It's not because the parties or suppliers or competitors are not operating properly, it's because how the deal is structured is just wrong for all parties. And I believe that's the case right now. I've watched various meetings, town halls, of who should be conditionally approved, who should not be conditionally approved, more service elevators and whatnot. We're trying to cut costs left, right, and center, but I believe we've been looking in the completely wrong direction. If I had to put one word on the issue, that word would be utilization.
Sorry, we're now 2.5 minutes into your presentation, and I still haven't heard about the budget.
We identified opportunities that could reduce accessible transport costs around 30 to 50% for the TTC. A glaring red flag was the TTC pays a base rate to the taxi companies higher than the inaccessible rates. In other words, if I call a taxi right now, I will pay them less than what the TTC pays them for the exact same trip. That was simply jaw-dropping for me. I'm not here to preach you, despite what you believe, of the prerequisites of having a taxi brokerage to operate in this tender. Nevertheless, companies are free to get their brokerage license just like we did. And in our opinion, the TTC is overspending by tens of millions of dollars, and the taxi drivers are making an income barely manageable. Where is all this money going? Of all the vehicles on the road, we have found that about 35% of the time they're being utilized. This creates gross inefficiencies. In other words, in a 12-hour taxi shift, the driver is only making money 4 of those hours.
You have to tell me how this relates to the budget. I need to understand, because we want you to help us. I think you know something that we should know.
I'm getting to that, sir.
Okay, but we're now 3.5 minutes, and you've got 90 seconds left.
So we believe the biggest mistake right now is how this current RFP is structured. It is structured to create inefficiencies. I believe every person in this room has a
That's
responsibility.
not the budget. You're out of order. You've got to stick to the budget, or I'm just going to tell you can't speak any longer. Like you have to reference the document in front of us. If you're telling us we're spending too much money on Wheel-Trans in a particular
Yes.
way, explain it. And I'll give you another 25 seconds because I've interrupted you. But you've got to be responsive to what our process is today.
I can respond to that, sir. When we did
Okay.
the assessment right now, we believe that TTC on their accessible cabs are paying about 50% more than you should be doing. We believe that there is an efficiency that can be done by reducing the dead hand time. That could actually reduce TTC's cost by about $10 million
Okay.
over that budget period.
Okay, so you can tell us now how you could do that. Is this part of what might be part of an RFP process then?
We don't want to deal with the RFP. We believe that the current RFP is a flawed one. We believe that TTC would be better by extending their current contracts by 1 year and doing an efficiency review.
Okay, at least I understand your pitch. Okay, so there's a $10 million saving, you think, for us in the operating budget.
You're-
If we change the process in a year's time, or we do it now?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Sir, in my own selfish interest would be to submit this RFP tomorrow, and I'm more than confident that we'll be successful in winning a portion of the RFP. I just think it's irresponsible to have wastage of 70% out the window of taxpayer funds.
yep.
I don't think we're talking about RFPs here today.
I don't think we are
I
either.
think this is out of order.
Okay. Well, we're at 5 minutes anyway. Did you have a question, Mr. Karagianis, or was that your question? You did put your hand up for
I do have
questions.
a question. I mean, I just want to, if I may, Chair.
Sure.
There was a statement that was made that riding a taxi is cheaper than riding the TTC. So my question is, what's the cost of TTC fare? $3, something like that?
We're not referring to the customer, we're referring to the subsidized portion. What the TTC subsidizes to the current taxi companies is more than what it would cost me to take a taxi.
Let me finish my question, please.
I'm sorry.
You said that riding a taxi is cheaper than riding the TTC. Would I be correct in that? That was your statement that I heard. I might have misheard. Would I be correct in that?
No, not
You can
quite.
refer to your notes if you want.
No, what I was referring to.
Want to refer to your notes? And if I'm incorrect, I apologize.
That is incorrect, sir.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I'll ask why it's incorrect.
The reason is that currently, accessible transport is reimbursing at a rate of about $3.6 per kilometer for accessible driver. That's a standard cost. The individual is only cost the Presto fare. If you were to get an accessible cab, it's at the same rate as any other
I
cab in the
thank you.
city.
I appreciate it. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. So standard cab rate would be $4.25 for the first kilometer and $1.75 for subsequent kilometers. On the standard fare, when we worked it out at about 12.5 kilometers per fare, you are spending about $30 more for that fare using the accessible transport rate than you are using what would be an accessible cab, just booking it from the door.
That is entirely responsive to the operating budget,
sir.
and thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Daphne Godovich. Ms. Godovich, you've got 5 minutes. We'll look forward to what you've got to say.
Hi, my name is Daphne, and I'm a youth activist with Climate Justice Toronto. I'm here to talk about the climate crisis because it's real, it's not an opinion, and it's not a debate. Scientists across the world are urging governments and companies to cut emissions, and all we see are governments and companies and their inactions. I took the subway this morning and I opened the metro, and the first thing I see is Ramp Up Regional Climate Efforts Report Urges. This is the report called From the Atmospheric Fund, which was formed by the City of Toronto. They say that 33.9% of the carbon emissions in the Greater Toronto Horseshoe area is from transportation. If we're really going to take the climate crisis seriously, why aren't we funding public transit more? Why are you relying on revenues more than public transit? Yes, that's my question.
Sorry, so
could be, yeah.
you're going to leave your presentation at that? Because we ask, the way this works is we ask questions of you. You can put a question to us, and if the board wants to respond, they can in the form of a question, but if that's the end of your presentation, that's fine. Do you want to keep going? Was that a rhetorical device?
Okay, yeah,
Which
I
was
do have a
effective.
bit more, sorry. It's my first
Okay.
time. Basically, when I read the report, when it came out on Friday, like one of the things we talk about at Climate Justice Toronto is transit, the fact that it's becoming more and more unaffordable for Torontonians. We really are not, we don't approve the 10-cent increase because nor the hiring of more of the very ill-named revenue protection officers, because it's ignoring the real problem. It's ignoring the fact that the TTC is becoming more and more unaffordable. The TTC wants to criminalize those who can't afford it by placing more revenue protection officers. Like, we think about our healthcare, and we don't question that it's made available. Why don't we think about the same way with public transit? Why don't we invest in it more? People might say this is radical, but healthcare wasn't free all the time. Tommy Douglas, the Saskatchewan politician who first gave us healthcare first in Saskatchewan, he was vilified. Medical associations, doctors, they protested it. The RCMP, they had a 1,000-page report on him. They kept tabs on him. It was not popular. But we don't question our healthcare system now, which itself is not perfect because it doesn't cover everything. We need to start seeing public transit as a public good. It really needs to be more affordable, and this means more investment from all levels of government. And if the TTC is saying, you know, oh, well, they're not giving us enough money, well, then fight for it. We will be behind you. This is public transit. The fact that it might be free, this idea is becoming more and more popular across Canada, across the US, across the world. We will be behind you. The public can support you on this, but you need to go to all levels of government and demand more. Say that this is a public investment for our future, for my future, for our children's future. We can't just look at this in the short term. This is for everyone. This is for all Torontonians. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, I have some questions. Just to clarify, are you clear that in terms of funding transit, it's not just a matter of speaking to the commission, but you will need to speak to the city budget.
Okay.
And indeed, other orders of government, that you're aware that that's sort of the pathway that comes after this. I wonder if I'm not a fan of filling the system with enforcement officers either, but I'm wondering if you're aware of the box we're in. Council has a really serious focus on the Auditor General and any recommendations they make, and those recommendations being followed through. And the Auditor General came here and estimated that our fare evasion problem may be as big as $60 million a year, and recommended that we do what this budget now recommends that we do. And if we don't do that, it's hard to go to not only our, put on our councillor hat and go to the city budget, it's hard to go to any government and ask for more money when that public document shows that problem and we don't address it. So are you aware that we have that problem when we go to even the city's coffers?
Yeah, I'm not denying that the TTC loses a lot of money when people don't pay. But I mean, it's true. We'll be talking to like the Auditor General. It'd be really good to talk during the general budget as well, not just here. But the thing is, like, we're
What I'm saying
ignoring
is
why
we already
people
have
can't
talked to the
afford.
Auditor General. She did this assessment. And once she, as an independent accountability officer, makes a recommendation, if we ignore it, we don't look that great going looking for the
Okay.
money.
Well, I guess we will have to continue to convince with public support that hiring officers that criminalize people who can't pay, like, I don't blame you if, the Auditor General is a separate entity and you have to follow the recommendations.
Yeah.
I'm aware of that, but I still think that, this is something over the long term that we're going to have to push for. We're going to have to convince the Auditor General as well, and more councillors and all levels of government, and really look at why some people are fare evading. Because if you go to work and have to take the TTC, it can be a big amount. So ignoring, like, when people, you know, like there was a report done by U of T a few weeks ago saying that black families are more likely to go hungry than white families despite income because of intergenerational wealth. So like there's a multitude of factors when it comes to fare evasion. It's not just like, oh, I don't want to pay $3.10 or $3.25. It's hard to put. There's multiple factors.
Oh, yeah.
So I appreciate the fact that you said that you listen to the Auditor General because it's a separate entity and according it its respect. And I guess our job as the public, and yours as well, is to continue to fight for free transit. Yeah.
Right, okay,
you.
thank you.
Councillor Minnan-Wong has a question.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're down at least $60 million, and that's a conservative number. That didn't include rush times and the investigation. So how did you come to your analysis that $60 million was from people who can't pay? How do you know that they can't pay? All $60 million worth of it. How'd you come to that conclusion?
Well, to be honest, I don't know every single person who has
Thank you.
evaded the 60 amount.
Thank you.
But, again,
I'm finished.
why, no, wait. Why are we looking at the number when we know that it's unaffordable? 60 million or not, we can't afford to pay $3.25 every single direction. Like, there's no debate that the TTC is becoming more and more unaffordable.
You've answered my question. You don't know. Thank you.
And criminalizing people for it. Like, people go to court and they get a ticket for $500 because they can't pay $3.25. You really think they're going to pay it? Nuh-uh.
Oh, so, no, actually, so I have one more question. People who steal by taking a fare, stealing is wrong, isn't that correct?
Of course.
So these people are stealing from the TTC, so our system with that $60 million that could be invested in buses, in streetcars, in capital, in fixing our backlog and all the things that are broken, all those people are stealing from the TTC, and you don't think that they should be held accountable for that?
I don't think it's stealing in the sense that it should be a public good, and you can't possibly say that all the people who avoid the $60 million are fare evaders themselves. It's true, maybe some people who avoid the $60 million can pay, but that doesn't mean that all of them can. This is the problem when something like this that contributes to the right of mobility is not considered a public good. Like our healthcare, we should be funding it like our healthcare, like our education, like our libraries. Thank you.
Well, you've had a provocative presentation, and you still have interest from Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Chair. I really want to thank you for coming to make the presentation, but you're saying education, healthcare. This is not what we're dealing with here. Education is provincial.
Yep.
I'm sure you know, and healthcare is federal.
Yep.
Federal funding that's transferred to the province. But however, I do have a question for you. There's people that they have to use their cars because they have to go to a distance, and sometimes these people cannot afford even to pay gas for their car. So if you live in Scarborough and you got temporary work out in Mississauga, you get in your car and you drive and the car is old and beat up and all that stuff. If these people are on a red light, should they be given the same opportunity to say, well, you know what, I have to go to Mississauga and I can't pay and I made a mistake by running the red light. Should they not be charged by the police, like people people skipping on giving a fare when they get into the streetcar or on?
You're asking me whether running a red light is comparable to.
Well, so the people made a mistake, they run a red light. The
Yeah.
yellow light turns into red. I mean, should they go to court and say, look, I can't afford to pay the $350 or whatever the charge is and the increase in my insurance? I was going to work and I don't have money to pay even for gas. Should we use the same yardstick?
So I guess your question is like, how should we, when people
I'm
fare
just asking
evade?
if-
Yeah. So the question is, how do we charge people who can't afford it?
Yes.
Very good question. Maybe
Your
we
answer
should
is?
look at the way our justice system works. Like, I mean,
Again.
Yeah.
Not in this frame, but I thank you. Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thank you, Chair.
This is fantastic. Commissioner Ross?
Hi, I know you don't like the linkage between the fare increase and fare evasion, but the 10-cent increase represents just over $30 million. If we could cut fare evasion by half, we would have no fare increase. I don't know if you looked at it through that lens.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, I won't deny. Which is why I think like the TTC, and you will have public support about this, to get more funding to invest in this as a public good. I don't disagree that you lose money when someone doesn't pay. That's not debatable. But yeah, we're so focused on like, oh, this amount from fare evaders and tickets and things like that, but we're not focusing on like, the TTC is underfunded. Before the 90s, when, who was it? The Premier Harris in the 90s who got into the Ontario government, the TTC used to get more subsidies. And ever since Harris came in, it went down. And governments after him haven't contributed to subsidies. And it's not just the Harris government, it's all the ones afterwards that don't want to fund the TTC. Like the TTC was created in the 1950s, and they knew that it would need investments. They didn't think, oh, this is going to pay by itself with profits. It's really rethinking public transit as a public good and investing in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It provoked a lot of conversation. Mr. Gordon Winch. Mr. Winch, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. So some other people here brought up a number of issues with the budget proposal and the fare increase, including issues of affordability, issues of criminalizing poverty, and issues of discouraging usage of transit, which continues to antagonize the climate crisis that we're currently living through. I just want to add that for people that don't have a car in this city, taking transit is not an option. It is a necessity to get to your work, it is a necessity to get to your school, and in that sense, since it is not an optional expense, we really should be considering it a tax. And that's what fares are. They're a poor tax. They're a tax on anyone who can't afford a car to get to work. We don't charge fares on our public roads, we don't charge fares on our elevators, but for some reason we decide it's necessary to install fare gates and charge anyone who can't afford a car to use our public transit system. And if they can't afford that either, then we hire cops to go and find them and round them up and charge them up to $500 for being poor. Now, it's not lost on me that as we are bringing in these fare increases, we also live in a city with exceptionally low property taxes. Now, it doesn't seem a coincidence to me that every city councillor is a homeowner. Many of you drive your cars to work. So my question for you is, as young people living in an increasingly unaffordable city where rents have nearly doubled in the past decade and property values have done the same, how can we trust you to guide us through the coming climate crisis and build the solutions that we need? How can we trust you to build massive, dense, green public housing to dilute the market and bring down the cost of housing when every city councillor is sitting on $1 million investment in the real estate market? How can we trust you to prioritize the TTC and funding for our transit system, subsidizing it to make it affordable and available to people in our city when many of you commute in a climate-controlled box to work? Your record shows that we can't. While the cost of housing, as I said, has nearly doubled in this city.
Point of order. I think the deputant might want to rephrase some of his comments. I think he is making accusations that are not fair, and I think you might want to rephrase some of his comments regarding the people sitting around this table.
With respect, sir, we're facing...
I just made a point of order to the chair.
I would say that I appreciate the passion of your comments, but we are talking about the operating budget.
Yep.
And I think imputing motives to others doesn't get us to an analysis that we need to get to the point. And I think you've made the point on your concerns about people's motivations and perceptions that might influence decisions, but give us a chance and tell us how you think we should change the operating budget. Why don't we start there and see where that goes?
Allow me to continue. Toronto, as a municipality, has the lowest property taxes in the GTHA or Ottawa, and it has for a long time. Meanwhile, the TTC has one of the highest fare box recovery ratios in Canada. Almost 70% of the TTC is funded by fares, and yet we continue to increase the fare year after year, rather than increasing property taxes and funding the TTC in that way. We, as young people, we see our governments failing to take action on the climate crisis. We see a business as usual approach, continuing the same fare increases that have happened over the past decades, continuing the same lack of funding. And so we've begun to take things into our own hands. Many of you probably saw tens of thousands of students marching in the street in September. Like it or not, we are entering the era of the Green New Deal, and free public transit is on the agenda. To raise fares in a time when tens of thousands are marching, students are panicking about their futures, considering whether it's even worth it to plan a family in a time of climate crisis when, by the end of the decade, we may see crop failures affecting millions or even billions of people in this world.
I urge you to tell us what we should do with the operating budget, because some of these submissions maybe should make them the federal government, provincial government, municipal government. We have a smaller brief here. If these inform your comments that are going to come on the operating budget, I'm looking forward to that. Otherwise, I'm going to cut you off.
My submission is that we should not be increasing fares. First of all, we should be decreasing them and possibly eliminating them altogether. And if that requires requesting funding from either massively increasing our property taxes or levying, as was said earlier, a fare increase on roads or on applying for driver's licenses, so be it, whether that's funding from the province or from the federal government. The TTC should request that funding and make transit free for all users in order to increase ridership and decrease emissions in the city.
Those are all your statements? Okay, any questions?
Yes.
Councillor Carroll.
So this is the second time that the issue of getting to the point where transit is free has come up a couple of times this morning. I don't know if you're aware of the quantum of that. If we make transit free, then probably people are going to expect that that's the case in the GTA, indeed in transit systems across the province. That would mean coming up with an extra $4 billion a year. An extra $4 billion a year just to replace that fare revenue. If we ask that of the province, how do we also go back to them and ask them for the $26 billion that we're short to make the vehicles run and have actual vehicles?
26 billion.
We have about $26 billion in backlog of state of good repair and just renewing vehicles with new ones that we need in the short term. We need it now. And we're not going to get it. We're going to get small amounts. But $26 billion is what we need just to meet our capital needs so that the system is there for you. If we make it free, then really we're asking them to come up with $4 billion of new money every year to make transit free in Ontario. How do we square the two? Which one do we ask for? The $26 billion or the $4 billion renewable every year?
I would posit that you ask for both. I mean, when I'm talking about entering the era of a Green New Deal, I'm talking about changes in public policy priorities on the level of the changes we saw around the New Deal or around the 80s and the beginning of neoliberalism. This is an epochal shift that we're talking about here, so asking for significantly more taxes in order to introduce radical, bold policies to address the climate crisis is entirely in line with what we want.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thanks very much. Shamim Nasrabadi. Morning, sir.
Good morning.
I think you've got 5 minutes. I'll look forward to hearing from you.
Cool, thank you. I have to apologize that I didn't prepare this handwritten because I didn't have time because the budget was late, but I'm going to try anyway. I'm going to thank first the people who deputed before me for largely bringing up what I'm going to say anyway, especially the two who spoke directly before me and my friend from the TTC Riders who largely said what I'm going to say anyway, but I'm going to say it anyway. So I am here because when I ride the TTC, I rarely pay for it because I can't. So when I see the budget here largely being funded, the 2/3 of the funding increase sources are from not from the city. They're from the riders. I already can't afford to pay for this, right? I will sometimes have to get off of a streetcar when an inspector comes on and then get on the next one so that I can make it to work at all. I work 2 jobs. I'm underemployed still with those 2 jobs, and I have 2 degrees. So like I'm doing all that I can, but all of my costs are rising and wages have not risen. And there's nothing I can really do about that. And so what I see when you present me with this budget that says we're leaning on you for your funding is that I have 2 options. And one of them is that I can leave this city altogether because it's not for me anymore. What I've been told is that you can't live here anymore. Or my other option is that I can take my chances with the system and continue to try doing what I've been doing with 50 more fare cops. And maybe I make it through, and maybe I get chewed up and spit out by the legal system. So I'm here speaking on behalf of, of myself, on behalf of people who are in the same situation I'm in, and on behalf of people who are in worse situations than I'm in. Because sometimes when I work this awful job that I have, one of the 2 awful jobs that I have to take the TTC very late at night, and I see people who are in worse circumstances than I'm in. People who are, to put it frankly, they're indigent, and it's winter, and they have nowhere to go because the shelters are overcrowded, and they're closed, and buildings are closed. And so one of the only places they can go at night to stay warm is a streetcar or a bus. So I'm speaking on their behalf as well because 50 extra fare cops means that some of them are going to die. I think that's all I have to say about this.
Thanks very much. Any questions?
Actually, I will add one more thing. I would like to rebuke the individual who decided to grill my friend back here because he thought she was an easy target rather than grilling my friend from TTC Riders, who largely raised the same points that she did. So that was very rude of you. Thanks.
All right. Thanks very much, sir.
Any questions?
Questions? Councillor Carroll was having her hand going there. No? Okay. Thanks very much, sir.
Thank you.
And I hear Mr. Kogali has returned. So this is his last chance if he'd like to speak. Waleed Kogali? Morning, sir.
Morning. Okay, I'm just gonna first of all start off by talking about the process and how disappointed I am, and I believe a lot of folks who are in this room, about the lack of proper notice, lack of proper consultation when it comes to a very important topic that affects residents across the city, an increase, not just in fares, but an increase in the cost of living. And I am actually shocked that there was no opportunity for folks in our communities to be actually consulted. A meeting was rushed. A motion had to be passed at this meeting to allow us to speak or allow folks to register to debut before 10 o'clock in the morning. And if that doesn't concern you, as those that are responsible for making sure that our democratic process works, then I don't know what else to say. So that's the first. The second point that I want to raise is with regards to basically the charade or the act that we're having here. If the decision of council is to proceed and to move with a process that doesn't allow residents of the city to actually be consulted, it's actually making fun of not just the process, but the people of this city. And I'm actually really concerned about what comes out of this meeting, and whatever is said by my friends or colleagues or folks who've been advocating for actual solutions that will result in folks not being criminalized in the city, for not being able to access a public service. And the conversation about the elimination of user fees for public services. And the fact that our own mayor is willing to support future criminalization of racialized communities in the city. I am shocked, appalled, disgusted by the charade. And I hope that folks on this committee will do the right thing, allow folks to register so they could speak to the impact. Students weren't allowed the opportunity to come and speak. Many working people were not allowed the opportunity to speak because they have to work to live and survive in the city. But you folks are comfortable with moving forward the process that basically disqualifies many voices. And I am disgusted, and I'm appalled, and I'm actually ashamed that I came to speak because, you know what, a lot of folks don't want to continue to be part of the charade. And I hope you folks are listening. And I hope for you folks you do the right thing by not passing forward a budget that doesn't consider the lived experiences of folks that actually use public services, like public transit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Carroll.
Yeah, hi, good morning. So, Waleed, you weren't here earlier this morning when Mr. Yule spoke, you know, a frequent presenter, and what he suggested is that we go back to the process we used to have when there was an actual TTC budget standing committee with public meetings, so that the proposal that we got late at night would have had a couple of public opportunities leading up to it in the month or so before, which were also opportunities to depute. Over time, there was less and less attendance there, but I hear you saying you need more time, and really—
Shelley, I have a question for you. Are you comfortable with this charade? Are you comfortable with that?
Waleed, I'd like to
Listen,
finish
I'm
asking my
not
question.
comfortable answering a question
sorry.
that actually doesn't address the needs of
Councillor Karygiannis has requested a point of order. I've got a rule on it.
I would ask, please, that you advise the deputant that we ask the questions, he gives the answers.
Oh, I've got that.
And not to be so aggressive.
I think Mr. Kogali knows
around the
that.
table.
And so, I mean,
the demeanor should be more appropriate for what we're hearing today and not so aggressive as
So
that.
the demeanor is to intimidate the folks that you are supposed to ultimately serve, right? Thank you.
So I'm still waiting for the chair's ruling.
yeah, so
This
I
actually
think
needs to
Mr. Kogali understood the comments. Try and keep it more measured.
I
And
am very
think-
measured. This
well,
is outrageous. There was no consultation whatsoever
Okay.
for members of our community
think
to
you've
be
made
part
that-
of this process.
you've made the-
And what I've made
You've
is a
made the
simple
point.
and that is let us
I'm gonna
stop
rule-
with the charade. Let's
I'm gonna-
stop with the bullshit. Let's stop with this.
So if
Just
you
continue.
do that again, I'm going to have you expelled.
Okay.
You're not going to swear.
Okay.
Okay?
So I just want you to understand that this
So,
is actually
look,
ridiculous.
we understand your point, and now it's time to allow one of the city's elected representatives to ask you a question.
Okay,
And
go
if
ahead.
you want to ask
a
questions,
question that's sincere,
and I
please.
would invite, well, that's, again, a very pejorative statement.
It's not correct.
No, it is a criticism of
We,
Councillor Keller.
I questioned the process, and I questioned
Sir, you've
how
gotta
this
stop
committee
now.
continues to support the
Sir, you're not,
process.
you've
It
got to
does not
stop.
actually
I'm gonna ask-
meet the needs of our
I'm going to ask
community.
someone to remove the deputant.
Okay.
I don't know how that's done. If
I'm
you're
actually
not
going
gonna-
to not be removed. If Shelley wants to ask a question, she can ask.
No, but you're not deciding when that
And
happens.
if you want me to leave,
You've
I'll
got to
leave.
leave, sir.
I'll leave. Okay?
And yeah, call security, please. Sorry? Yeah, no, the deputation's done, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the charade.
Okay. So we have now dealt with everybody who registered up till 10 a.m., and it's now time for questions from the commission.
Great.
To staff. So I saw Councillor Carroll's finger go up, Karygiannis.
I had a number of questions. I wrote down the page numbers because we were zipping through that so fast. Oh, page 12 in the revenue projections. That's a pretty big jump. We're planning on a revenue projection that, as near as I can calculate, looks like the ridership will go up, but that everyone will pay a fare. I'm wondering how Fare Pass is calculated into these revenue projections, and is it? Did we figure out fare increase plus 533 million rides, and then back out some Fare Pass loss? Because the math for me didn't work. Yeah, I'm on page 12. Yeah. So is there a projection of Fare Pass usage within the ridership growth?
Through the chair. Yes, all the different ridership groups are considered as part of the ridership growth. When it comes to Fare Pass, specifically, the funding for the share that's subsidized comes to us from the city. So from the TTC perspective, we are receiving the full fare on all Fare Passes.
Okay, so because of the way it's subsidized out of the budget, out of the city's budget,
Yes.
it works out anyway.
From our perspective, it's like the whole
So the Wheel-Trans, it's a big jump in Wheel-Trans revenue, 13%. Well, it's only 1.1, it's still 13%.
So I can.
Is that due to further improvements in the dispatch service that we're looking at that big jump in revenue growth?
Yeah, so I can explain that. So what happened on Wheel-Trans is with the advent of Presto, we revised our methodology about how we allocate pass sales between TTC and Wheel-Trans, and so it results in more being allocated to Wheel-Trans. So it's actually, in terms of, a change in terms of ridership, Wheel-Trans ridership is basically effectively flat year over year. But because we're now allocating, we're able to get more precise information about how to allocate the different pass sales and where they're being used. We're allocating a bit more to Wheel-Trans.
Oh, okay. Are we, Mr. Chair, are we just asking about operating right now? Or are we going to have okay, wonderful. Then I only have one other question then, which is one of the things that this budget is relying on is the almost $20 million that is overdue for Metrolinx. Have we had conversations such that we're hopeful that's going to happen in the first half of the financial year? Because if it hasn't happened by the first half of the year, we're going to be looking at a crisis June 30th. Yeah.
Yeah, through you, Chair. I have had discussions with the CEO of Metrolinx, and we're going to continue into the coming months, having a number of discussions on areas so we can work on this to get it in the budget for this coming year.
Okay.
For you to staff, a couple of questions. You mentioned something about Sunday morning service. There used to be Sunday morning service outside some churches, and I know some churches in my area. Is that to be reinstituted, or is this something once they lost it that we're not going to be visiting it again?
The Sunday morning service was in relation to opening the subway 1 hour earlier from 9 a.m. to 8 a.m. And the hours associated with that were for ensuring that bus routes also started 1 hour earlier. We did do a review, I believe, in 2017, which is a post-implementation review for restoring periods of operation, and that analysis showed that there are only a couple of pending routes where new services would be added. That was included in the 5-year service plan that was presented to the board on December 12th.
I'm not trying to interrupt you, but did you look at the service outside the churches that were discontinued a few years back?
Yeah, they were looked at, and they didn't pass the TTC service standards.
Now, we have kids that are riding for free. There was a request was placed by me to take a look and report back about seniors and veterans riding for free between the hours, I believe was 9:30 to 3:30, off-peak hours. Has that been taken into consideration? Has that been reviewed? Is this part of this package? If you were to come back with a positive response, how would that impact the budget that we have here now?
Through you, Mr. Chair. We haven't looked at those questions yet. We've been planning this year to do the five-year fare policy. It will be studied fully in the coming policy
All right,
review.
thank you. Wheel-Trans, there's been reports that there's a long time people waiting on the phone to answer, people that do not have computers. And I was wondering if in this budget, you have included the extra operators that you were thinking or might be thinking to hire in order to handle the overflow or even go outside our system to get assistance to answer the overflow.
Through the chair, yes, we have included that in the budget, so we hired an additional 10 bodies in the wheel trans reservations, and you'll notice over the past few months even we've seen a reduction in our wait times and reservations.
Now, you have in here the transit to have 50 additional officers in order to handle money that we lose to people that are either jumping the barriers or people that are getting on TTC streetcars without tapping in. Now, can you please advise if that 50 additional officers would help us recover the costs of people that are actually not paying? I mean, is there a balance there? How much money are we looking to get back?
We are looking to get back $7 million. That's been incorporated as net recovery for this year.
And how much money would we be spending to hire the 50 additional operators, including staff, including, like a wholesome thing like staff, wages, benefits?
Through the chair, it's a total revenue recovery of $10 million, of which $3 million will be spent on the addition of those 50 staff. So it's a net 7.
So 50 operators, including supervisors, including where to house them, including everything that it's to run this will cost us $3 million?
Yes, 3.2.
3.2 million we're looking to recover?
A total of 10.
Okay.
Bringing $7 million in addition.
And is there a sunset clause or a sunset that we're going to relook at, if those numbers are realistic? Have we considered that? I mean, are we looking at a year out, 2 years out to see if hiring the 50 additional officers is something that has paid back?
Yes, absolutely. We'll be looking at this probably month by month, if not week by week, as we manage and monitor the deployment strategy. So just to remind the committee that we had 70 inspectors approved last year.
Okay.
Not all of them came on board, so we'll have those as well as these additional 50 for which
And
will be.
the 70 that have come on board, has that helped us in recovering some of the costs?
Yes, it does.
So we keeping a close eye on that?
In fact, they are the ones that are major drivers of our deployment strategy. So that's all being worked through now with the existing plus the hopefully planned resources that we're asking for here.
All right. Last but not least question, we had an increase from 2014 to 2019 of 216 million, I believe was 40% up. And in 2020, you're looking for an increase of 3.5%, 26.9 million. I wonder how much of this will be used in order to get the new electrical buses that we're looking to get. I believe it was 50 or some new buses that we're looking to get in order for us to test. How much of that money will be used, of that 26.9 million will be used towards that end?
So through the chair, this is the operating budget. We still have funding in the capital budget to finish the procurement. So this is just that funding for the e-buses was in the capital budget.
So the buses then will not be part of the 26.9 million increase of the 3.5% over the next year?
To the extent that they are on the road and we are operating them, yes, overall, this operating budget helps fund the operation, but we're still we're finishing the procurement and those funds are in the capital.
Okay, let me ask it another way. We're talking, I mean, we've seen that there's a movement. Okay, I'll leave it at that. No, but you see, my question, if I may finish, Chair, is like, okay, we're looking at operating and we're looking at saving costs, and now we're also looking at bringing down the emissions, the greenhouse emissions. How much of that money are we, and what benefits will we have in reducing the emissions? Well, I mean, if they can help us out, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Chair.
Respond to that, sort of the net saving.
That's for you, Chair, if I could. I think part of the answer would be, what are we increasing it from a fleet perspective to build our capacity to get cars off the road? For instance, it looks like we'll be putting an additional 20 vehicles out during the morning rush hour, an additional 30 vehicles out in the afternoon rush hour, as well as some of the off-peak. So it'll allow us to give the ability for that.
Is there a number a tangible number maybe? If not, you can come back to us. Thank you.
Councillor Bradford.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, how much of the $2.14 billion in operating is funded by the provincial government, and how much is funded by the federal government?
So through the chair, this budget here does not reflect any provincial or federal funding directly. However, there is just over $91 million of provincial gas tax funding that sits in the city's budget, but is essentially the contribution towards this budget.
And that 90 million in gas tax, that goes to operating, or it goes to whatever city council budget determines it goes to?
So it does go to operating. We get a total of about 160 million per year, of which some sits in the capital plan, and the balance is sitting in the operating budget towards transit, which has been council's decision of how to allocate it.
And that's from the province?
That's from the province.
So out of the 2.14 billion, we're looking at about 90 million via gas tax via the province.
Yes, but outside of these numbers.
What about the federal government?
The only funding that we get from the federal government is on the capital side, which is being used to help fund our state of good repair.
And why is that? Has that always been historically the case with the federal government?
So through the chair, historically yes, that's correct. There has been no real funding strategy nationally around funding operations. There has been some discussion with FCM, as you may know, trying to advocate for considering our operating costs as well when we complete our capital projects.
There's a lot of MPs in the city of Toronto, 25 or so, and so they would have an appreciation for the operating challenges and the funding requirements, and perhaps we could make a request of them to consider that.
That would be helpful.
Agreed. Great. Talking about the fare increase, how do we make the decision on where the fare increases should be applied and to whom? Across our different passes and our different programs.
So through the chair, initially, I think, and traditionally, what has occurred is really looking at whether it's a value that is in sizable chunks, so a 5 cent versus a 10 cent. Typically, there's consideration on whether the adult cash fare should increase or not. There has been also some consideration to some of the other concessions that exist as well. And so the decision this year was to recommend the 10-cent fare increase, understanding that between the various concessions for the different groups, that there is a little bit of an imbalance. And I would just say one more time that the fare policy that we're recommending funding for is really what we need to look at to think about the structure in a different way.
Right. We heard from one of the deputants this morning, proposal to increase cash fare to $4 flat rate and less of an increase on the Presto Pass. Was that considered? Why did we land where we landed?
Through the chair, so we're aware that that there is only a 5-cent differential this year. We're also aware that fares are harmonizing around the GTA around us, which is the $4 amount that the deputant spoke to, but that is the work that will be undertaken as part of the fare policy review to bring all of that together to think about the structure differently for the TTC.
Okay. One of the things I hear back from constituents and certainly at council is the lack of predictability with our fare strategy. And I know that we're coming back with the 5-year fare strategy. Can you remind us what that will be looking at and when we should anticipate seeing that in front of the commission here?
I'll just start at the very top, and I'll let my colleague Kathleen Loon-Thomas continue. But clearly what we do want to lay out is a 5-year plan of what those fares should look like in terms of structure and value, to the extent that we continue to improve our longer-term planning and help us support what is required. It's been a request that I have made on the other side at the city, looking to have a multi-year view on what that might look like. And Kathleen, I don't know if you want to add anything else?
Through you, Mr. Chair, without using up too much time, just to say that it'll be the same process that we used with the 5-year service plan, where we consult extensively with community to hear what it is that they're looking for. They're asking for us to do the thought of experiment of zero cash fare, so we'll be looking at all of those things.
Okay, probably got time for one more. Unscheduled short turns on the bus and the streetcar have been obviously a challenge with the TTC, but we've actually seen quite a bit of improvement on that, declining 46% and 65%. My question is, how does that impact our service levels, and what budgetary considerations did we have to make to actually achieve those results? How did we do it, and what was the cost of doing that?
You'd know that better.
So through the chair, I'll start. Essentially, we identified the funding that's in the base budget in the 88 operators to ensure that we have flexibility. We did a bit of piloting through 2019 on how we use our various buses to help deal with those issues, and streetcars, of course. And so the funding that we have requested in the base is to re-baseline so that we can actually have that agility in the system. And so that allows us to...
That's built in now.
It's now built in.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks very much.
Commissioner Osborne.
Thank you. I'd like to ask about everybody's favorite topic, which is fare evasion and enforcement. And I noticed that it's just shy of the solution that's been proposed is just shy of 30%, a third, sorry, of our shortfall. A couple things. Number one, the measures that we've put in place are largely based around, I think, the additional officers and this visible presence to encourage people to pay their fare when they get on a vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes.
So in my reading, I do understand that this is meant to be very effective in other transit systems, and so I don't feel like this is not going to bear the fruit that we hope it will. I'm wondering if there is any part of this number that relates to fines.
So through the chair, this number does not relate to fines. The enforcement staff who may issue a fine do so, but that revenue goes to the city. So that does not come back through to us.
Do you know what the city puts beside that?
No, I don't. It's something that, it's a piece of work that we want to engage the city on. As we continue to ramp up our activities, we expect to see that there'll be more activity going on through their court administration system, and so we're going to have to start doing that, because this is really a new level of activity that we're seeing. And actually, I just may add, so the other part of this in terms of enforcement is also looking at our Presto data as it gets better, and hopefully better coming out of that AG review and our work with Metrolinx, that we can start to dive into the details more and use that to help inform our decisions, get insights into that to help with our deployment.
Thank you.
Councillor Minnan-Wong.
Yeah, I got a few questions just to review. So fare card jumpers are responsible for stealing $60 million from the system, correct?
So through the chair, the AG review identified about
that's
64
conservative
million.
estimate. So it's fair to say that that but for this jumping, this fare jumping, this stealing, that we wouldn't have to have a fare increase, correct? If we had that money in our budget. If you had $60 million, we wouldn't need the fare increase, would we?
We would have more passenger revenue, yes.
But we wouldn't need the fare increase, right? You'd have that. Yes?
Potentially.
So those two settle each other out. But for the fare evasion, we wouldn't need the increase. And that, what is the fare increase? How much are we getting from that?
It's roughly about $30 million.
So do we get a subsidy from the city in this budget?
Yes, we do. We're requesting about $27 million or 3.5%.
$27 million. So Now, I know you know this because I know in your previous job you worked for the city. What's a 1% increase?
Still work for the city.
Oh, you're on secondment. Had to get that in, eh? What's a 1% tax increase?
It's $30 million.
So the other, at least, we could have actually taken that from off of the city, and we actually wouldn't have had as high a tax increase if there wasn't the fare evasion, right? So here's another question. If we're making, well, you said $10 million for spending 3 for 50 fare enforcement officers, why don't we get more?
So through the chair, as I indicated, we did get funding last year for 70 inspectors. Not all of them have come on board.
Okay.
So we're adding 50 incrementally. We will monitor. If we feel that there's something in year that we can review, that's possible, we'll be back.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I'm going to switch gears for a second because I want to talk about the fees that Presto charges us. On every fare, they make what percentage?
5.25%.
And have you been hearing rumors that they want more?
That would be some discussions that we've had going forward.
And 5.4% represents, what's the total nut on that?
So that is about $54 million annually.
I see. Okay, so that's 54 million. And, okay, so then I want to go back to, I want to talk a little bit about this arrangement about, that we don't do enough in terms of subsidies and helping people out. So this briefing note you have here, we give youth, post-secondary, and seniors total in 2020 budget $72 million, correct? Plus $11 million for the CNIB transit fare. So that's 83 million, is that right?
Based on our 2020 budget, correct.
So we give $83 million out of our entire budget, plus, what's a 2-hour transfer worth?
So at the time that it was established, it was an adjustment. Our revenue went down by about $20 million.
So now, if you include that as a benefit that we give to transit riders, now we're over $100 million in benefits and things that we do to make it a little bit easier for people to ride the transit. Is that fair to say?
That would be correct.
What about other things like Christmas, New Year's, people ride free and stuff like that? Is that a cost to us?
So through the chair, I believe there's a sponsor for that?
Well, that's good. Okay. And then the other big one is, our accessible service. So we make a certain amount of revenue from that. When you subtract the revenue that we get from the cost of running those services, what's the difference? So we're already at 100 million. If you add in the Wheel-Trans, taking away the revenue, that's how much we pay for. How much is that?
So on our Wheel-Trans side, fares provide about almost 6%.
How much?
6% of the total cost of delivering Wheel-Trans services.
And what's the total cost of delivering Wheel-Trans services?
It's about $156 million.
So you take off about 12 million. So we're
9 million.
we're kind of around $250 million of things that we do to help transit riders out who are challenged in some way because they're seniors, they're a kid, or transit fare pass, or because they're disabled. So this idea that we don't do anything to subsidize transit riders in the city, is it fair to say we spend $250 million helping them out?
There are adjustments to our revenue as a result of those various discounts and concessions.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lalonde.
Yeah, I wanted to start by following up on Councillor Carroll's questions around the Metrolinx cost recovery. First of all, I'd like to know, what is the actual agreement on cost recovery? Like, what is meant to be the understanding there? And then I wanted to follow on to understand how much money do we think we should have claimed that has not been paid up till now? And then finally, how are we accounting for all of that? If we have an IOU from Metrolinx, how does that hit our financial statements?
So, Mark, do you want to just describe the agreement?
The agreement in the PSAW states that Metrolinx should recuperate the TTC for all costs incurred for additional service due to delays resulting from crosstown construction.
Okay.
And as it relates to the financials, to date, we've incurred just over $60 million and have billed them for such, and have received $14.8 million up to the middle of March 2017.
And from an accounting perspective, the 46 or so that is unpaid, does that show up as an asset for us, or do we only record the funds coming in when they're actually paid?
So we only record the funds when they are actually paid.
Okay. So if there were any kind of payment for retroactive amounts billed, that would come into our operating receipts as we receive it.
That's correct.
So there is potentially an opportunity in 2020 to the extent that we could negotiate some kind of reasonable settlement with Metrolinx on this.
Through you, Chair, that's correct. We've had that discussion with the city as well.
Right. Okay, thank you. I had one other type of question, and that's kind of building on, I think it was Commissioner Bradford's questions around fare policy. He asked most of mine, but the factual question I was looking to answer is, what percentage of our fare collection comes from cash and Presto tickets, the $3.25 fare? I'm just curious as to how material a piece that is of our fare collection that we're not putting an increase on.
It represents roughly about 6% of our total revenue.
Only
It's
6?
Passenger revenue, yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have a few questions on the cash fare. On a Presto fare, we pay Presto 5% of revenue, correct? On a cash fare, what's the cash handling cost of a cash fare on a percentage basis? Do we know that?
It's, through the chair, it's actually more of a fixed cost.
Well, then,
Sorry,
do we know it? Can we calculate it on a per fare cost so we can have it analogous?
I don't have that handy, but it's fair to say that the processing cash is going to cost more than 5%.
It'll cost, okay, that's all I need to know. Second thing is, we are an outlier transit agency by not having a significant difference between our single cash fare and our Presto fare. That's, as I understand it, most agencies have a much bigger gap than we do. Can you tell me why you made that policy decision? Because I've heard deputants approach it from two perspectives. One deputant felt that it should be kept lower because of poorer people purchasing single cash payments. Mr. Yule thought that we should charge more and be more consistent with other agency practices. So where do you stand, and why did you end up where you did?
Mr. Chair, it's Kathleen. I'll take a stab at it. We erred in favor of two things that are going on right now. Beginning next year, we're going to be doing a very hard Presto adoption plan to support people who are having trouble getting on a computer and that kind of thing to get a Presto card.
Okay.
And once we do that, then two things will start to happen. We'll start to think about where we stop accepting, where else are we going to stop selling, that kind of thing. So supporting people. In the meantime, we are favoring the people who don't have enough money to make a good financial decision, and they use cash, and we're trying to keep it as low as possible.
So we shouldn't expect to see this small a differential next year?
Exactly.
Okay. My next question relates to process, and I'm sympathetic to some of the criticisms that have been made about our process, and it's not a criticism of any individual, it's just a process question. So how can we do better in our interactions with the city and internal interactions so that we can get the budget document out to either the board and the public sooner, so we don't have this happen again, because I think it's a little off-putting for even some of us to get the budget document. It's something so important to get it on Friday night of a weekend before the meeting. And I'm not being critical, I'm just trying to figure out how can we avoid it happening so we have a little more notice to the public and to the board. That's a rhetorical statement and a question.
So through the chair, I can assure you that next year will be different. I think that there have been a lot of various issues at play, whether it's been staff turnover capacity here at the TTC, as well as work with the city and trying to understand the issues and pressures and where we've landed, and really just the turnaround of getting all that forward. I'm very cognizant of the fact that this was late on Friday, and I do apologize for that. But we've done the best that we can given the set of circumstances, and I endeavor to do my best to ensure that does not happen next year.
Okay, and so next question, just in terms of process again, because we did deviate, it's unfortunate that we had all those things you just talked about the same year that we didn't do the budget group from the board with public meetings. Does anybody have any comment on how they think that worked in previous years, and would that have helped this year if we had done a more formal public review with a board subcommittee? Rick, you want to comment on that? Like, you know how it worked.
Yeah, sure, through you, Chair. You know, historically, in the last few years, there were very few people attending, as you recall, the budget subcommittee, and the decision was made to go in a different direction with the working group. You know, that was an opportunity for a public discussion, though, earlier than at this point in time, as you do recall.
But it was one that wasn't accessed by very many people or agencies?
That's correct.
Okay, thanks very much. From now, any speakers? Councillor Carroll?
Yes. It's unfortunate that Mr. Kogali lost his temper, but I think we all understand why. It was frustrating for ourselves to get the budget on Friday evening and put it in. But the question I was in the middle of asking him was about the process, and if in fact this is the first year where we've tried just having the Budget Advisory Committee, which met in an informal setting with just 2 commissioners, and so not a public meeting. We sometimes make decisions to streamline a process because attendance has dwindled anyway, and so what was the benefit of that? And sometimes the public doesn't realize the benefit of it until it's gone. And I think we heard loud and clear this morning that they would like us to move the process back up to keep the kind of budget calendar such that we could have a budget subcommittee that actually was meeting and deliberating and fleshing out, hearing the real proposals. Yes, there's a fair increase in this, but if we had a budget subcommittee, likely we would have the kind of conversation that in past years we used to have about a fair increase. Here's what we're proposing, it's a 10-cent fair increase, but here's the rationale. And here are 3 different ways we looked at it, 3 different maths that play with the various fare bands and arrive at the amount of revenue that we're hoping to capture. So that we could have made the decision in advance of the final submission if we did want to stand pat with the cash fare or not. Was this the year to do it? And there would have been the opportunity for the community to comment in a timely way. So I really think you can't do it in the middle of a budget process, but I really think as soon as we get this one out the door, we really ought to revisit whether or not getting rid of the budget committee was a good idea. Without the deadline that it imposes, we had trouble making this deadline. And if you put that imposition back in, suddenly we're having a different print deadline to meet, and so the decisions have to get made in a more timely fashion. So I really think we got to look at that. I also wanted to say that I think we've got to get to the point where we start leaving here with the message in our hand. I'm going to make a similar comment when we get to the capital budget, but in this one, I don't think any commissioner can leave this room and go to any cocktail party or government function or stand in the Lieutenant Governor's Christmas tree room or anything without the same message. If we don't get that Metrolinx $20 million, we're in trouble. We're in crisis by the end of Q2. And so no one should leave here without that being our operating story, because we really are. And so I think we've got to start to get to the point where, while we're having to look at a tough budget that includes a fare increase, I think we have to start to get more consistent in what are the red button issues. And that one is a big fat red button in the middle of this operating budget. Even if the city is ready with their subsidy, and even if the residents are able to meet the projection and don't vote with their feet and call Uber instead of paying that fare increase, even if all of those other things are perfect, we've got a problem if that 20 million doesn't appear for the operating budget. So that's all I'm going to be talking about if anybody asks us about our operating. The other piece that I will never stop talking about and have been talking about since 2003 is our budget and the city's budget are never, ever, ever going to be totally whole until we return to that Bill Davis formula of the province having a role in our operating budget. The 50-50 operating would take the fare ratio down to 50% and 50-50 for the other, and that ask, we should never leave any provincial room without reminding them that that's been our ask since 1995. Those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Commissioner Bradford and then Commissioner Minnan-Wong.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, I want to start by thanking all the staff, Rick and Josie and the entire team for their work on preparing what is a very detailed and very challenging budget. I know the timing was tight, and everyone would have liked to have had more time with it, but I do appreciate all the work that went into this. And I want to echo the comments of the deputants and my colleagues here today, and recognize that increasing fares, again, it's always a last resort. Being a part of the budget process at large here at the city and on the TTC, you see the budgets prepared year after year and how hard everyone is working to find a solution other than going back to the fare box. And as part of that, while the fares actually are going up, so is the city's contribution. This year, let's recognize we're putting in another 3.5 percentage points this year, another $27 million that the city is bringing forward to cover our operating costs, bringing us up to $790 million a year out of that $2.14 billion. So, my position is very simple in that we are here again because both the provincial and federal governments, stubbornly resist the change that would recognize that we really need to fund transit in a more robust way in this country and in this province and in this city. And relying entirely on the fare box and the city's contribution, $790 million, it's not the best way, it's not the responsible way to do that. The TTC, as we all know here, is the fourth busiest transit system in North America. It does a lot of heavy lifting for the City of Toronto and for the region. And certainly the provincial and federal governments benefit from that. And despite a lack of this critical funding, we are trying our best to not only maintain service levels, but in fact this year actually improve service levels. We'll see what that looks like next year, but that's certainly the intention. So when I ask the question of, how much is the provincial and federal government putting into this, the answer is 90 million, roughly 4% of a $2.14 billion budget. And the federal government, it's nothing. And I appreciate that historically that hasn't been the position of the federal government, and the provincial government continues to cut funding across a number of different ways. But the reality is we all need to make contributions to not just the capital and the expansion, which we're going to talk about next, but also the operating of this system. Everybody has a role to play in that. So, we've had meetings in Ottawa with Federation of Canadian Municipalities. We continue to push and advocate for this. But I think it's on all of us to take up that charge and that message to those other levels of government, because we're going to be right back here next year in the same position if we don't re-examine that formula and take another look at it. So those are my comments. Thank everyone for their work, and appreciate it very much.
Thanks very much, Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to tell Councillor Carroll I don't get to go to those posh Christmas parties at the Lieutenant Governor's house, so you can tell me about how nice they are. Oh, well, there you are. Building alliances. Maybe he's going to recruit you as a candidate next time. He's got to start now. I'm supporting the budget, and there's a fair increase. But, you know, going through budgets, if you've gone through budgets before, especially in the TTC, what you do know is there's no low-hanging fruit. We got to pay for gas, we've got to buy supplies, got to pay salaries, et cetera. But the biggest low-hanging fruit in my mind is fare card evasion. That's obvious. Like low end $60 million, probably the high end $80 million. And so for those people that are following the rules and paying their fares, you're paying more, 10 cents more a fare because of all the cheaters who are breaking the rules. They are responsible for that fare increase. And that's why I'm supporting the hiring of the new officers. We have to stop this hemorrhaging of money that is resulting in fare increases and us not being able to invest in the system and build the system. So, you know, this fare increase I put squarely on the fare evaders. And we should do more to address that issue, and we are. And I'm fully supportive of that. I'm sad about the 10%, the fare increase, but quite frankly, we don't have any choice.
Any other speakers? Okay, we're going to move on to the capital budget. We're going to vote.
I have a compulsory meeting in the mayor's office, and I was wondering if you might indulge me. You know, I just think it's responsible because I'm on this committee. I'd like to vote on the operating.
No, we're going to do that right now.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
So, motion to approve the operating budget.
Oh, so moved.
The recommendations in the report. Seconder for that? Done? All in favor? Yeah, you don't. Well, I'm not as experienced as you are. So we now move on to capital budget. Mr. Alan Yule. Would people like to have a 5-minute break? No. No? Okay. Then you can be vice chair while I... Yeah, we've got quorum. We'll all take turns. Yeah, I can't go to the bathroom. We call it a nature break in court.
Mr. Chair, this will be quick. On top of approving this capital budget, I would like to suggest a couple of very cheap and effective petty cash projects for you to consider. When the platforms were first redesigned at Dundas West Station, they were designed to fit two 15-meter CLRV streetcars, with one loading passengers and the other lighting them passengers at the same time. With the new 30-meter streetcars, half of that second car lights its passengers outside the paid fare zone. With half the passengers offloaded outside the paid fare zone, this reinforces the just walk in into the paid fare zone attitude that is prevalent at Dundas West Station. Moving the loading zone to the corner of the King platform would help make room for a second streetcar to alight its passengers completely in the paid fare zone. Last summer, temporary modifications were done to the Dundas platform to fit two King cars onto that one. Doing this petty cash capital project would also affect our operating budget. Fare jumpers have been able to hide amongst those fare-paying passengers that walk from the back of their paid fare zone into the back of the paid streetcar into the station. The second project I'd like to recommend you look at is the Eglinton East Corridor. We can print new stickers for these signs as soon as January 2020. The TTC did this before on King Street. Instead of the transit priority lanes on Eglinton East being only valid from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., these lanes could now be 24 hours a day. This could be done by the end of January or the end of February at the latest. By the end of April, we could be looking at the rest of the 905 route all the way to U of T Scarborough. By summer, we could be looking at lane painting options. This is not a replacement for the East Eglinton extension of Line 5. This is a stopgap measure until we have rail all along Eglinton from the airport to U of T Scarborough. Mr. Chair, the best part of this petty cash capital project is it won't cost the TTC a thing. These are City of Toronto signs. The TTC just has to get the ball rolling by asking the city to start changing the signage in this corridor. Thank you.
Thank you again. Just observe that Toronto is actually a very, very, very rich city compared with many other places in the world. Our houses are now maybe $1 million each in the core at least, and we have a huge number of vehicles around. So the relative starvation of our transit system for what the needs are is a political solution, and I really hope that our politicians manage to expand the confines of the Transit Commission and the motions to again seek more money from the property tax and the vehicle registration tax especially. That is the key to financing many of our transit needs. And we do need that mountain of expenditure. That is a real mountain. We have to be able to fund that. And I think to really have the good example for the other levels of government, if we don't tackle it somewhat ourselves by the hiking of the property taxes, which is beginning, which is good, but the real issue is the vehicle registration tax and not having that. The figure that I used from a couple of decades, I didn't bring a copy down, but the Vancouver found that there was $2,700 a year worth of avoided cost and subsidy to each car over 2 decades ago. If we raised $60 million from the vehicle registration tax, that implies that there are 1 million vehicles in the city. So it's like $2.7 billion a year that is being subsidized or not being paid for from the motorists. Even though the cars are very helpful, absolutely. So for me, for the state of good repair and all the other things, let's start charging the cars. It's absolutely imperative that we begin to have a higher user fee because the fare evasion, the Gardner, for instance, and the Don Valley Parkway, where are the tolls on that? If we actually had the vehicle registration tax, then I think the other, at least with a more reasonable government than what we have at the province now, a more reasonable government would have gone, well, you're inflicting some pain on your people, so I guess we can do something there. And now with one of the mountain of expenditures that we need, like we really do need to have new streetcars. I think there's a rare opportunity to actually get an increased or a good order into the Bombardier. So I think that should be seized rather than neglected. I know it's hard to actually make the commitment, but if it seems that the stars are aligning to get a good order of streetcars to have it happen, I think that's something that we should, because we do need the streetcars. The state of good repair, you know much more about it than I do. Oh yes, going back to the streetcars, in terms of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, am I at 5 minutes already? Surely not. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you, sir. Right. The shipping energy we don't count shipping energy in all the goods that we bring into the country. So in terms of the greenhouse gas problem that we have, it's much worse, similarly with air travel. But in terms of where we're getting to effectiveness of our capital, the King Street project was very, very good use.
We got a lot of return, both in transit terms, but also in bang for the buck. So keeping it simply surface, I think, is a really good way to actually get good value for our money. And I've been wrestling with how to propose to do some sort of triage, because the young line is so brittle. Even if we get the automatic train control, it's still going to be a brittle system. So I didn't bring down the maps, but there are 2 surface corridors that are underused, and we need to have that sub-regional quick approach using either the Don Valley Parkway or Bayview or the spur line that's owned by Metrolinx beside it to get up to Thorncliffe and then do the north-south. That's part of the relief function, not relief mega project. And I really hope that we can adjust our thinking to relief function, not a relief mega project maybe in a decade or so, because you are in crisis. We are in crisis. Climate crisis, mobility crisis. The other option that it should be explored again, I think it was part of a TTC move, maybe 1979 or something I've heard, that Gatineau Hydro Corridor. I think that's part of the solution for the transit issues in Scarborough. It's on surface. It's so wide. I was on the SRT on Saturday, I guess it was, and it was like 16, 20 seconds worth of travel through this very wide hydro corridor. We've used hydro corridors up in York. So I think from my outside of Scarborough standpoint, this is part of the solution, and it'd be cheap again doing something on surface. So relief function. The other thing is trying to get cooperation from the province on the Go Richmond Hill. And I'm hoping if we actually tunnel through the cost barriers, we could actually reallocate. If we did something that was triage, a multiplicity of approaches, maybe we could defer the Bloor-Young costs as well, which would add another $1 billion to the mix. So now, Chair, you referred to the concept of having a development freeze. I think
you're over now?
Okay, we're at the point it's so brittle. Development freeze. Push for that.
Thanks very much. Any questions for this deputy? Councillor Karygiannis, so you got a chance to do it again.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Chair, through you to the deputy, and I appreciate the fact that you're here. I was wondering if you, at any given point in time, I've heard you time and time talk about let's take on the car. Have you done a calculation what it costs a family to have a car, a family with 1 or 2 kids? Have you done a calculation, insurance, maintenance, car costs and everything else? And if you got a family and you got 1 or 2 little ones, and you want to transport them around short distance, long distance, you need to have the car seats and everything else. So a car is mandatory. Have you done a calculation on what it costs?
Well, I do appreciate that when you have kids or seniors, the vehicles are very, very helpful in many circumstances. Absolutely, sir. But I think the CAA, or some, I have the recollection, it's like $8,000 a year, maybe $10,000 a year. I'm sure other people might know more precisely than that. It is a chunk of change.
So you wouldn't be surprised if I would tell you that insurance rates in some parts of the city could be up to $3,000 or $4,000?
No, and that's why I think people are interested in biking and
you wouldn't be surprised if I were to tell you, like, look, if you got 2 kids, you can't really bike if you're going to go more than 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers. And in some areas, biking is not, the infrastructure is not as good as downtown.
Well, the 2001 bike plan for Scarborough was very interesting to see. I didn't bring my copy down, but if we'd actually spent, it's 25,000 kilometer to repaint the lane lines for a bike lane, and the on-road network for Scarborough got maybe 10% done.
I just wondered,
so,
anti-car
with the electric assist bicycles and the back feeds.
This. You're not anti-car, are you?
You guys are talking over each other, so
I'm a bit of a, well,
my last question
one of you
is,
should talk at a time. As long as it's, and I would say, I think we are deviating from the capital budget.
All right, thank you, Chair. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I am a curmudgeon. They are the serial killer that
you've made it
the
clear.
TDC and bikes are not.
You have been entirely consistent. Thank you. Nice to see you here again, Mr. Aaron. You have 5 minutes.
My name is Eli Aaron, and I'm the budget lead at the Toronto Youth Cabinet. The TTC is a vital component of Toronto's transportation system, carrying 1.8 million passengers a day. Toronto's youth rely on transit to get to school, work, or other needs, as many young people do not have access to a personal vehicle. The Toronto Youth Cabinet strongly supports public transit from a transportation, equity, and environmental perspective. We want the TTC to succeed. Last Thursday, the TTC board adopted the new 5-year service plan. At this time, additional capital funding is required to implement the first year of the service plan. Specifically, proposed improvements to key stop areas and transit priority measures are each facing a shortfall of $3 million. We believe this is a small ask and it should be funded. Despite large purchases of buses in recent years, fleet renewal continues to be a necessity. A number of the TTC's buses are reaching the end of their lifespan, and there is currently no funding to replace them. The capital investment plan states that if replacement purchases remain unfunded, the size of the bus fleet will begin to decrease. With a reduced bus fleet, it will not be possible to deliver service to meet the needs of today, let alone keep pace with future growth. The TTC's capital investment plan looks at a period of 15 years to assist the Commission in preparing for future needs. Funding is required to immediately advance an order of 60 streetcars to accommodate ridership and population growth by 2022. If the order is not placed, up to 10% of the bus fleet will need to be utilized on streetcar routes. It is possible that the bus fleet will both deplete from a lack of bus purchases in addition to buses being reassigned to streetcar routes. This would significantly impact mobility across our entire city. Youth, seniors, and low-income customers use the bus for a far higher proportion of trips than adult customers. The equity impact would be severe. We are aware of the magnitude of funding the TTC requires. It is therefore essential that all levels of government increase investments to the existing transit system in order to keep our city moving. Toronto's taxing authority is limited, and the provincial and federal governments must play a larger role. Currently, the federal government has committed to funding 9% of the TTC's 10-year capital needs. The federal government should begin by permanently doubling the gas tax fund for transit as requested by the Canadian Federation of Municipalities. The province has only committed to funding 6% of the TTC's 10-year capital needs. The city needs to pressure the province to reinstate the planned increase of the gas tax fund for transit. The city has a responsibility too. The Executive Committee's approval of the increased city building fund is a start, but additional measures will be necessary. The city should look at reintroducing the vehicle registration tax as recommended by the city manager in 2016. A non-residential parking tax should also be explored. The TTC board needs to send a clear message to City Council. Leaving the TTC's critical capital needs unfunded is not an option. It will place the success of the entire city at risk. The cost of funding the capital investment plan is substantial. The costs of leaving this plan unfunded are dire. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor Karygiannis and then
Thank you,
Councillor
Chair.
Carroll.
Through you to the deputy, and I really appreciate the fact that you're here today and you brought some important points to the limelight. You mentioned about the federal government and what they should be doing or what they shouldn't be doing. Question for you. Have you reached out to your MP and conveyed that message?
No, we have not. The youth cabinet, our role is to advise the city, the municipal government, city council, and that's really the limit of what our mandate is.
Through the chair, I've asked if you had, not the youth cabinet.
I have not, no. I'm here representing the youth cabinet, and I have not.
Thank you.
Councillor Carroll.
Yes. I was interested when you brought back up the PVT. It's a long time since we had the vehicle registration tax. Has that conversation happened at Youth Cabinet? Their memories have been refreshed that we used to have this thing that would be netting us $75 million in new money a year?
We discussed it last year, I believe, And the general feeling was that, that drivers should contribute something to the city's budget because right now, for example, the transportation services operating budget for last year was $400 million, and in user fees, drivers basically pay nothing, and transit users pay about 67 to 69% of operating the TTC. So there's a feeling that either through parking levy or VRT that drivers should be contributing to the city's budget.
Yeah, and there was a pushback that wasn't fair because there are all these GTA riders and they're the whole reason for the system, but in fact they're only about 15% of the ridership. It's people here, and so maybe drivers here should help fund this. So the other question you focused on in terms of fleet renewal, you focused on the streetcars because they really affect both. If we don't renew them, they affect both the streetcar fleet and the bus fleet. Youth Cabinet can really only ask things of the city, but in the past, the streetcars we're looking at on the street now, we really had to stick our necks out and place that order before we knew whether or not we had funds from the feds and the province. We just stuck our necks out and placed the order and said, if you want to cut the ribbon when they arrive, you better fund. And they came. Is Youth Cabinet advocating that we should do that now in terms of ordering the 60 streetcars and making sure that we have both buses and streetcars in ample supply?
Yes, so we haven't actually commented on the capital budget before. This is the first time.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
The reason is that the future operating impacts of not funding the capital investment plan are so severe that this year we actually decided to comment on only the capital budget and not the operating budget. Because
that, yes.
what basically is going to occur is what it says in the report that's before you, is that 170 buses will need to be basically taken off of bus routes to put onto streetcar routes. So that's roughly 10% of the fleet. And then we could have up to, let's say, another 15% of the bus fleet age out, and we could lose a quarter of all the buses that we have currently. And I mean, that would be absolutely disastrous for service across the entire city. So anything that can be done to accelerate the procurement of both buses and absolutely the streetcar order needs to happen as soon as possible. Streetcar services need to grow over the next number of years. And also, of course, if we don't, there's severe consequences for the bus network.
Thank you. Thanks, Eli. And thank you for going through this with the whole cabinet, too. Thank you.
Any further questions for the deputy? Thank you very much, Mr. Aaron.
Thank you.
Milan Tvelde, or Tueld. Morning.
Good morning. How's everybody?
Great. Looking forward to hearing from you. 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. So I'm just going to try to keep my comments very brief. So my name is Milan. I am a newer resident of Toronto St. Paul's, originally from York Southwestern, and I'm also here today on behalf of TTC Riders. There are a couple points I'd just like to speak to. First being the purchasing of buses and streetcars. These need to be prioritized for the upcoming budget. Purchasing more buses, streetcars is mentioned in the 5-year plan, and we need the budget to commit to this. If the board should approve this today. Otherwise, this item should be deferred and considered when we know how the city building budget will be allocated. Second point here is, so this report and this board has mentioned that the importance of keeping folks moving in Toronto is a priority. And getting more people on the bus and out of their cars. But with the TTC projecting more subway closures in 2020 than there were in 2019, transit users need the TTC to make a stronger commitment to bus priority. Introducing more bus-only lanes, especially to ease traffic and congestion during the times of construction that have been projected for the next year. We need bus-only lanes in order to accommodate for this. We don't want to see what's the word I'm looking for? the buses that take over when the subways close. I'm having a brain fart right now. Thank you. We don't want to see those special buses getting caught in traffic like they already are to this day, especially if there's going to be more closures. We need to just project for that and plan for that, basically. Also, implementing bus priority will also send the message that this board is prioritizing transit measures and transit priority measures outside of the downtown core. So we have a very rich bus network in this city, and it's important that this board prioritizes that and how that impacts folks that live not walking distance from a subway station. So people from my old community of York Southweston, especially parts of Toronto St. Paul, where I live right now, Dufferin and Rogers area, we need these bus priority measures immediately. And just beyond that, it would be remiss for me to not mention this before my time is up, but I'm very uncomfortable with this board mentioning the anti-racism lens that's going to be applied or an equity-based approach that's going to be applied in terms of transit when we're not adjusting our approach to how fare evasion is handled. There are municipalities across this world and North America that are handling fare evasion in a way that is a social response and not a punitive response. And I think that these are measures that this board and city council must also take into account immediately. Anti-oppression, anti-Black racism, and anti-racism strategies are not about training our officers about sensitivity training and teaching them the right language in order to treat people better ideally, which is just not realistic. It's about removing officers and applying a social response. And part of that social measure that could be applied is taking funds that we're putting towards transit cops and putting them instead towards funding things like the Fair Pass measure, if that's allowable. But these are all very important strategies that must be seriously considered because the presence of having officers in our stations are pressing to folks that look like me and my younger brothers and sisters, and it makes me very uncomfortable. And yeah, I'm gonna wrap that up right there. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me.
Any questions? Thank you very much. Okay. Noreen Rizvi from Unifor, People Make Our Streetcars.
Good afternoon.
Morning.
And thank you for
afternoon
allowing
now,
us
you're
to be here again. It's a pleasure to be here, and really under these sort of urgent circumstances, it's an obligation for myself representing workers in Toronto and Thunder Bay. My name's Noreen Rizvi. I'm the Unifor Ontario Regional Director. We have 168,000 members in Ontario in 22 different sectors, transit being one of them. And also today I'm here to represent our union and the hundreds of members at Unifor Local 1075, which is the Thunder Bay plant, the Bombardier plant that make our amazing rocket and streetcars, as well as rolling stock on the city's public transportation system. At last week's board meeting, you discussed the 5-year plan and the 10-year service outlook. That plan included an urgent need for 60 additional cars. But while we all know the need is urgent, the proposed purchase is not listed until 2022. I'm here to say that that timeline needs to be moved up. TTC riders' urgent need for streetcars is well known and long documented, and I think we heard a few speakers today already on that. The CEO of the TTC first identified the need in 2013. The need was again identified in 2018, but the purchase has been postponed. There's no more time to wait. TTC riders desperately need additional capacity on streetcar routes. Ridership on streetcar routes has increased since the original streetcar order was made more than a decade ago. Toronto's population is growing rapidly, and we're currently the fastest growing city in North America. Multiple speakers at last week's board meeting indicated we should expect this trend to continue into the future. We need this additional capacity now to ease congestion and get people to work and social occasions on a more predictable schedule. In addition, the plant where these streetcars are built is at risk of closing. At the current moment, there's not enough work at that plant to keep the facility open into 2021. Without additional orders, the TTC and Ontario may lose the one plant that currently is able to meet the requirements of the TTC streetcars, a system which is one of the most challenging in the world. You heard last week from Gord Perks, who reported staff confirmed Bombardier is the only plant able to meet the 2022 order date. Furthermore, the facility also delivers significant economic benefit to the city and the province through creating and sustaining of good jobs right here in Ontario. You'll see in the written material we provided last week that every job sustained at the Bombardier facility in Thunder Bay supports an additional 1.5 to 2.8 jobs in the rest of the province, many of them likely in the GTA and surrounding areas. Around the world, it is a public policy goal that government procurement lead to local economic benefit. The Ontario government, the City of Toronto, and the TTC have met these goals by implementing Canadian content rules requiring all new rolling stock to include 25% Canadian content. Bombardier meets these requirements today with no additional research, no additional RFPs. New procurement guidelines established under CETA aim to restrict the flexibility of Canada, the Government of Ontario, and the City of Toronto when establishing Canadian content rules on future transit orders. However, nothing in the CETA prevents the city from commissioning additional streetcar purchases from Thunder Bay, an extension of its existing order. This avenue should be taken to avoid delays in meeting the city's urgent transit need. Letting the plant close will have a two-pronged effect. One, we will no longer be able to meet Canadian content requirements that lead to significant job creation in the province, and two, it will prolong the amount of time before we will see those streetcars actually enter into service and relieve the stress streetcar riders currently face. As you consider this 5-year service plan, please consider moving the streetcar order forward. As Mayor Tory has stated, we need those streetcars now. Thank you.
Any questions, Commissioner Carroll?
Thank you. So the issue, and you're right, you know, it's an issue so well known now that here we are, the Toronto Youth Cabinet, just posing on it. But if quite apart from the Canadian content rule, even if we had no commitment to that anymore, there's no question that extending this order is a faster manufacturing process and less flawed than if we started over again with a new supplier. And if you can tell us, I don't know if you can tell us this, but what is the difference between if we were to stick our necks out and make that order, or even part of that order, a partial order of that 60, so that we keep that open now? What's the difference between the ability to deliver, to start manufacturing the minute we order now, while the line's still there, versus if we waited till 2021 and it was still deemed an extension order, an expansion on the initial order? Is there a time differential once the line is shut down to reopen it? Do we end up paying for that in time?
So it's a great question, and that's really sort of our big issue, so thank you for that. And I was sitting back here listening when you had actually shared that in the past you have done that. You know, sort of stuck your neck out on that and placed the orders while the funding comes later. And I find that a very good, you know, option to explore, because the fact is there's not enough work to keep that plant sustained into 2020. And so what those dates look like in terms of lines shutting down, I'm not entirely sure. I know that already we have people working on reduced work weeks. And so once those lines shut down, once workers are laid off, the chances of any of that coming back are nil. And so I urge, you know, I have my friend here from Bombardier as well, that and you know, very supportive of each other in this work, because of course they want that plant to stay open as well. We know right now that there's not enough work to keep that plant open past 2020. So 2021 is just not a goal that we can even talk about in a realistic way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Next. Any other questions? No, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Meeker. Nice to see you again, sir.
Thank you. In Tipperary, they say maher.
No. Well, I am, but I'm from the north.
What we fondly call the island of Ireland.
That's correct.
And someday, well, let's not go there.
We'll talk another time.
On Thursday, this commission adopted a plan for the future of our transit system. It was a plan that the commissioners rightly lauded as the kind of advanced planning that should be part of the core work of the TTC to make sure that this is an effective transit system. It was a thoughtful, thorough, and clear plan. And the plan called for investment in buses and streetcars and the infrastructure to manage that rolling stock. Unfortunately, the budget in front of you today doesn't move that plan forward, and that is unfortunate for a number of reasons. As I mentioned last week, the plan is a stand-pat plan, and there is a compelling argument that we probably want to expand and increase our transit system. The plan, because it faces a condition where we have a lot of deferred maintenance that we need to deal with, doesn't fully optimize our bus transit system, and our buses are what fill in when planned or unplanned we have required maintenance, and we'll have more of both in the coming years. I think the most unfortunate thing about this budget is, in fact, it is going to raise fares for transit riders without improving the services that they get in the way that the plan says clearly we should be pursuing. And I think, in fact, though, the biggest concern is that not funding that plan in this budget doesn't just create a problem for this year, it creates a problem for years to come. The failure to move forward on this plan has lasting implications because, as TTC staff publicly confirmed last week, not ordering the streetcars we need now means we will not get them in 2022. As the Unifor representative just reinforced, the structure required to make sure that those cars get delivered on time will not be there, will not be rolling when it needs to be rolling to make that possible. So failing to act now means failure next year and the year after and the year after that. There are also very real risks that the closure of the line will mean possibly not being able to get those same streetcars and certainly not being able to get them at the same price, because reopening the line costs new money. And so we'll be also risking higher costs in a variety of ways. We're talking about, in this budget year, a very small investment to begin that order, to get rolling and avoid those risks and delays and costs. Getting that order right now also might, as the Planning and Housing Committee recognized last week, be something that will draw the feds and the province more into the conversation. When we step up, they are more likely to step up. So failing to do all of that is particularly unfortunate, and it is more unfortunate because the Commission doesn't even know if it needs to take that risk. The Commission doesn't know if it needs to defer that purchase because the Commission doesn't know what's happening with the City Building Fund. There are literally tens of millions of dollars that are potentially in play, that potentially enable you to avoid that risk and potentially enable you to avoid those costs. And right now, we don't know the status of that. As officers of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, I can see why you might want to defer a decision that imposes substantial risks and substantial costs until you know if your revenue stream does or doesn't require you to do that. In fact, I can't imagine why officers of a multi-billion-dollar corporation wouldn't defer that decision until they had that information. So I hope the Commission won't hobble the future of the transit system this year and next year and the year after that by making a hasty decision today, and we'll wait until we know if we have to take those risks. Thank you.
Very much. Any questions? Commissioner Carroll?
Yes, so the reason, I'm not sure if it's been made public yet. I don't know if you know the chair, who's ill, sent us a letter asking for a motion to bring back a plan in January. You're suggesting that we wait until we have that and put it in the 2020 budget?
I haven't seen the letter, but if that description of it I understood correctly, then I fully concur with your chair that you're in a moment where you have to make a decision that has really significant consequences. There's data coming to you shortly that will help you make that choice. and avoid some risks. I can't see why any organization wouldn't say, absolutely, we need to push this to January 10th or 15th. Well, we have conversations with the mayor and the folks who are dealing with the city building fund, and make a choice that doesn't impose risks, that doesn't send a signal to Thunder Bay that we're not buying the streetcars, that doesn't tell the folks at Bombardier they should be thinking about mothballing that line. I think she's quite astute to recommend that.
And the city's not adopting their budget finally until late in February. So you're not saying we should defer it and miss that deadline, but if we defer it and if there was procedurally a way to transmit it in time for the city budget, that's what you're getting at. You don't want to leave us twisting in the breeze beyond that.
No, I think knowing what the city subsidy is going to be and things like that are going to be very important. That's going to be decided in the budget process. The heart of the budget process are conversations that are going to be happening with the public over the middle of January. So if the commission were to decide that they wanted to engage in that conversation as well and convey to council what their support needs were going to be with the information that they need right now on the city building fund, that seems to me quite timely. No, I wouldn't recommend trying to do this in April.
Okay.
Any further questions? No, that's our last deputant. Now, questions of staff. Councillor Bradford has asked if she can ask the first question. McKelvey, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So my first question is, my question is about page 40 on the presentation with the vehicle orders. So my first question is, we've heard a lot of talk about turnaround on streetcar orders. What is the turnaround time for a bus order?
Through the chair, the turnaround time for a bus is about 1 year. Buses are more or less off-the-shelf items, and they can be procured pretty quickly.
Okay. And when does the Eglinton Crosstown open?
It's intended to open in September of 2021.
2021?
Correct.
Okay. And that will open up how many buses when that happens?
Approximately 50.
About 50 buses.
Those buses, though, are intended to be reinvested to improve other routes to connect to the crosstown.
Okay. So they're already reflected in your projection for 2022 of needing 345 buses?
Correct.
Okay. And then next year in 2020, you have 128,000 hours of new service that's proposed. There's no bus order in 2020 or 2021, plus there's this 5 dedicated bus lanes that are proposed. So do we already have enough buses in the fleet to accommodate all of that growth?
Through the chair, yes, we do have that. As we get more out in the outer years and we don't do procurements, then we'll be looking at sacrificing spare ratio and extending the life of the fleet. So not a good thing.
And then recognizing then that you're putting more buses into service in 2020 and potentially through those express bus lanes, are there enough extra buses left over for breakdowns of the SRT?
That might be an issue. Right now, we're looking at, there's a consultant helping us out with a study, which we'll be reporting back, I believe, in Q1 of next year on what to do with the SRT and any contingency plans we have for that.
And so if it's recognized that there may not be enough buses for shutdown of the SRT and/or emergency subway closures, like, do we have the ability to, it takes us a year to order more buses?
Correct.
Okay. And then the new buses that are proposed in 2022, are all of those e-buses as we're trying to move over to a fully e-bus fleet?
I believe a portion of that would be e-buses. I think we're still buying hybrids at that point in time. 80 of them are electric buses.
And when does that go out for procurement?
Through the chair, that would be Q4 of next year.
If we had. Okay, and is there flexibility then for us to look at that more closely? Like, for example, if we had other levels of government step up to have more e-buses, could we accelerate that? Or I guess my question is the procurement timeframe for a regular bus versus the e-bus the same? Or is there a longer time needed to procure?
For the bus itself, through the chair, for the bus itself, the procurement time is the same, but the charging infrastructure takes 2 years lead time.
Okay. And then my final question is, how many people can a bus hold?
Seated passenger capacity is 70, I think total is 9.
So for a 40-footer, it's about 50 people, a crush load, and for an Arctic, it's 75.
I just think I don't think we talk about that number enough, how many people are on a bus, and especially as we're going to be looking at trying to have dedicated bus lanes. I think that's an important story to tell, that we have 50 people in a bus, that's 50 vehicles that aren't on the road. So anyway, I just wanted to get that number out on the record. Thank you.
Okay, any other questioners of staff? Questions of staff? I know Councillor Bradford had his hand up.
I'm sorry, did we move to work through the lunch hour? What's the
Oh,
plan?
we were just discussing that. I think, it depends how many questions you've got, but we normally break at 1. I have every expectation we'll be done by 1:15, 1:30, so I would propose we go. We keep going.
Force of habit, I was thinking 12:30.
We are pretty tight right now. We are within 1 person of losing quorum, right? Am I correct? You're living at 12:50? Ha. Well, maybe we'll have to have lunch. So if we lose quorum, we'll have lunch.
That kind of incentivizes it, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'm not promising a good lunch. I'm just,
I'll bring Denzel back.
okay. So Councillor Bradford, let's keep moving.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, how much of the 7.4 billion on the capital side is funded by the province and the feds? We do better here.
So through the chair, the provincial and federal amounts combined, roughly 9 billion for our base program, and then an additional 1 billion based on the recent announcement of the PTIF2 funding of 500 million, and an assumed share from the province of an equal amount.
Okay. Tomorrow at council, we're going to be discussing we're going to have a major decision on the city building levy for the 2020 budget. What discussions to date has the TTC had on how those dollars could impact the budget that we have in front of us right now? This is the challenge.
Through you, Chair, in discussions with the city manager and staff, when we developed that capital investment plan in February that was approved by this board, we brought it to the city, and we've had discussions throughout the course of the upload process on what the prioritization would be for the 2021 budget on all our capital needs. I've had a lot of discussion regarding subway, for instance, with them, regarding the needs of the subway, recognizing it's greater than 50 years old. When we talk about signal systems, power systems, tunnel lining, switches, signals. So the letter that was part of the submission with the province was a letter to myself, to Chris Murray, identifying specifics on the subway for required funding. So it's all based on this year doing prioritization.
Okay, but the city building levy piece, specifically this new additional piece that we're approving or considering tomorrow, is not reflected in what's in front of us right now?
No, it's the needs of the TTC, which will be discussed as part of the CIP for that.
Right. The 15-year capital investment plan, since we saw it last year, it's gone up now. The backlog's gone up by 2.6 billion. Page 5 gives us explanations on that. One is the revised Bloor-Young costs, and then the second piece is the revised cash flow requirements for years 11 to 15. Could you just walk us through a little bit what that means?
So through the chair, so I believe when we said last year that these were order of magnitude estimates, they've been further refined. So Young Bloor, as you know, went up by $500 million, but we also did some refinement on the line 1 ATC fire ventilation, and just took those numbers out further so that we could have a better understanding of what the 15-year view of things are.
Okay. That makes sense. Page 36, the cost of the existing Bombardier contract and moving up the streetcar order, it references 420 million. Are there any additional related costs that we should be aware of, additional garages or infrastructure upgrades that would be required, or is that contemplated in that 420 number?
Through the chair, there are some extra storage space that's needed at Hillcrest for those extra cars. And there is funds in there associated with that.
So slide 40 through the chair, it identifies 418 for the streetcars, as well as another 85 million that would be required for the facility for the last 20 streetcars required.
And it's in there. I see the column that says, is it in there or is it's not? It's not in there.
It's in the capital investment plan. It is not funded in the 10-year capital plan.
Okay. More broadly speaking, the capital budget on 2020, what is the city's contribution to that? City of Toronto's contribution? Is it, it's 500 million, I believe?
So through the chair, the recommended debt that will be funded by the city is $268.5 million, as well as some recoverable debt towards the Young Bloor of another 15 million.
So if we're trying to accelerate, to meet the accelerated cost, we would have to like double the amount that's coming in from the city. Is that accurate?
So through the chair, we would need the full value of the 418, as well as the value for the 85, which is the 500 million. And I'm not sure, do we have a site for that facility? I don't know, sorry, I don't know that detail. But we would need the full 500 million added to the 10-year capital plan with the funding source.
Okay. Roughly 75%, I think, of the base capital plan is health and safety, legislated projects, and SOGR. How much funding support are we getting to actually meet those requirements that are mandated?
That's your last question. We'll have a second round if we need.
Okay, thanks.
So, well, all of it is being funded by virtue of our funding from the city, our partners, through the provincial and federal gas tax, as well as some minor development charges that help pay for that in our own depreciation costs.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner De Laurentiis and Shelley, you want?
A quick question on just the data. I want to say that the way that the data has been laid out around the needs, the budget requirements, the capital requirements is really, really helpful. After 3 years sitting on the TTC, I find that I have a whole lot more clarity today than I've ever had before. So one question for you as to how we might perhaps improve that. We've heard a lot about the concerns around when decisions can or should be made to get our orders in, and the TTC, the streetcar is a really good example. So my question, Josie, is would it be possible to do a timeline, a decision timeline, where you can take into account dependencies, and so that we have even greater clarity around when we actually have to make budget decisions. It would also be information that could be provided to various levels of government to say, look, it's sort of almost like a, hey, are you paying attention? We're going to be asking you for this. So, and it may be taking us a little bit out of what, the norm, but really a question as to whether that's something you could add. I'm thinking as an addendum to Appendix C would be really great to see, okay, so, with streetcars, here are some dependencies you need to think about, so a decision should be made at this time, and so on, sort of along some of the key decision points.
So through the chair, yes, I agree. That would be a way that we could show that graphically. As we come back with the CIP updated next year, we said we were going to be looking at those interdependencies so that we can set the priorities accordingly. So we could provide a way of demonstrating what needs to go first, second, and third, so folks have an understanding of the critical path associated with those projects.
Okay, next questioner, Commissioner Osborne.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. My first question is about the vehicles that we are spending. It's actually quite substantial sums of money to rehabilitate, to keep on the road, rather than spending even more money to replace them. And I'm wondering if there are any I mean, they're not measured in the context of this budget, but these things, these KPIs that we measure about distance, mean distance between failure and some of those kinds of things that would be impactful on the operation of the TTC that we don't see in these numbers.
If I could, through you, Chair, what we've worked towards the last few years to get into best practices, what we do is we make sure that we allocate enough money so that we can do proper overhauls. So if I can give you an example, a bus is designed to be built and last 12 years. But during the course of that 12 years, it'll need 3 engines, 2 transmissions, 2 air conditioning systems. So we have to make sure that we budget money for proper overhaul to get it to its continued useful life. And we do the same thing with streetcars, for instance, the trucks on the roads. 5 to 8 years, it needs a major overhaul. There are certain subsystems that are not designed to get the entire life of a vehicle. A streetcar, a train, a 30-year life, that's more of the structure per se, as opposed to some of the subsystems. So we've worked real hard to get to that best practices. We don't have enough in this budget, for instance, and it's unfortunate on page 40, when you look at the needs, we don't have T1 replacements on here. And T1s we know are going to be 30 years old in 2026. And to be proactive, we allocated funding to do some overhauls. I hope that answers your question.
And if I may, I'll just add, so I think what I'm also hearing the commissioner say is we will look to some of the data that we have created as part of the best practices and bring that forward into next year's budget so that you can actually see that information like we've shown you on the operating side.
Because we have seen that when we get these new buses in, we get these wild improvements in some of the numbers that we track, which means we're not sending out repairs, we're not pulling buses off the road, and so on, because we've replaced an aged, end-of-life vehicle with something that has lots of gas in the old tank, as they say. Yeah, okay. My second question is about a number of the deputants raised the extent to which users of services in this city pay user fees. And I have a very healthy suspicion that you can't answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Obviously, people who use the TTC pay a user fee. I believe that we pay a user fee for recycling. I'm just interested because the contention is that people who own cars don't pay user fees in the same way. If there is somewhere where we have this noted, because the user fee paid by transit riders is actually quite significant. So I would be interested in knowing across the gamut of services where we fit in. And as I say, I doubt you have this information at hand. You do? Good Lord.
I am a bit.
I'm very impressed.
Just my other role. So through the chair, so overall, the city has about $2 billion in user fee revenue that they garner. The city also has a user fee policy that kind of lays out the parameters under which you would determine that a fee should be full cost recovery from the user, and that's where there's usually a direct benefit. And so one of the areas where that happens, of course, is with development. And so that is full cost recovery for your direct, indirect, and capital costs to deliver that service. So that's one place. Solid waste and our garbage collection fee, as well as our water charges, are all full cost recovery based on consumption or bin size. So that's full cost. Here at the TTC, and not having full cost would be taking into consideration where there's a broader benefit and the extent to which a user pays versus the beneficiary, the broader policy objective is being met for the city. So I would say that in the TTC's case, we're about 65% recovery from the user and the balance being from the city funding. And so what that shows really is a 2/3, 1/3 kind of contribution towards a service that's being provided both for the direct benefit of the user as well as meeting broader policy objectives.
Okay.
Commissioner Carroll, I think you had some questions.
Yes. Well, first of all, if we can go to the overhaul page, which is, I believe, 35, yeah. But this is the bar graph, and underneath the numbers in terms of just doing overhaul. So we have an extensive overhaul program in all 3 fleets, I understand. The question is, how much of this is last chance overhaul? We're doing this, and when this overhaul reaches end of life, this vehicle's done. In sort of a rough percentage.
So through the chair, the SRT overhaul, there's some funds in there to continue that. After this overhaul, we're recommending that it doesn't go on again. This is the 3rd overhaul. There's money in there for the T1 Leo, which is the life extension of the T1 fleet, which is it's right now 25 years of age. It's approaching 30, which is the end of life. So that will get it for another 10 years.
That's it, yeah.
There's ongoing overhauls with the bus fleet. Each year there's overhauls associated with that. And then the streetcars, we're just getting into the overhauls on that, so.
The new ones, you're just starting. Yeah, there are tiny sums of money in there for that. I noticed in the thing. So if we go to, and there's been some question about the chair's letter to us is actually online. If people have their phones, they can look at it right now. I don't know that it's been circulated on a piece of paper so that they can get it, because we keep referring to it, that Commissioner Bradford's going to run. But I'm wondering if we have here, in your own presentation, we have a note telling us that the capital investment plan, the CIP, the prioritized, will be reported to us in advance of the 2021 budget. I interpret the chair's letter as asking for that in January, of this coming January. Really, that's what it is. So that I know I'm going to get what I want in January 20th, I'm wondering if the CEO can tell us, what do you think that motion is asking you to do? Are you going to take the 15-year plan that we had and put it in order, or are you going to put it in a pattern of asks? We need this right now, then this right now, then this right now. Are we going to know exactly what to ask for and what to move as a result of the January report?
All right, through you, Chair. What I look at her request as being is an unconstrained need by mode. You know, it would have us reporting back on the timeline and as well as a procurement schedule, estimated dollar values, as well as the previous allotment from other levels of government who paid for, whether it was the streetcar, the Line 1, or the buses themselves. And it also associated costs with facilities, for instance, or on Line 2, for instance. I mentioned earlier we're doing a TR overhaul, but an unconstrained budget would buy new trains for Line 2, which would require the ATC system or upgrading the 50-year-old system on Line 2 as well. So I look at her request as an unconstrained. We will put it in prioritization, but I would tell you that it's based on an unconstrained process.
So then I don't understand what I would be getting as a result of this. I want to move things up as much as I think the chair does, but with all due respect, what I hear you describing to me, I already have. That sounds like the 15-year plan, the $33 billion plan. I know what the needs are now, right down to the last bolt. We've been talking about it since I got here at the beginning of this term of office. Are we going to know, okay, this is what we need right now. This is the ask.
Because
I have vehicle needs. Which one of these do we need right now? Which is the most urgent? Are we going to have that in January?
We can put our best estimates together for you to have that prioritization in place. I said earlier, when I've had discussions even with the province and the city, it's the importance of supporting the subway system is very critical for the TTC. Additional streetcars is huge, as well as buses, but the condition of the Line 2 subway is very much a concern for me. The SRT assessment will come back in the second quarter of next year. The Line 1 will complete the Line 1 capital capacity assessment, and Line 2 will come in the fourth quarter of next year. We're making sure that we do a thorough review for all the interdependencies when we make our final recommendations. But if it's for basically vehicles themselves, to give you a very high-level need for the TTC, we can put that together.
So
It'd be include like
I
buying
think we
two
already-
trains.
The point I'm trying to make is I think we already have high level. There's a counselor who's not in office anymore, who, in his first year of office, he said, "Oh, I finally figured out what high level means. It means vague." Like, we already know the needs, and we know there's the vehicles, and then there's the tracks and tunnels, the unsexy stuff. But people are really concerned. You heard it again and again here that we're going to run out of one type of vehicle, and then it's going to start siphoning another type of vehicle, and the whole system is very close to having a problem. Because some of the veteran deputants here know how long it takes from order to delivery, especially if you do procurement and start new. They're very worried. So the question is, can we wait till 2021? I think the chair is asking for this report in January of 2020, prior to the city adopting its budget, because she's worried that when you bring forward that report, if we waited until February or March to get that report, and what it told you was, if you don't place that order right now, you're in trouble, we would be too late for the city's budget, too late to front-end something using the now known quantity of the new city building fund. If you think it's not going to pass tomorrow in council, I think you're dreaming in Technicolor. It's going to pass. So if we adopt today, we're adopting a 10-year plan that doesn't contemplate the new city building fund, and we end up locked in. Then we get a report in January that says you really need to move right now. Would it be a catastrophe if we were to adopt the capital plan today, conditional on seeing your report in January, in case we wanted to make a last-minute transmittal to the city budget for 2020 so that we weren't having to overhaul our 10-year plan next year? Would that be a catastrophe, really? Or you could calendarize the work that's there now, but any addition we want to make, we could still transmit to the city. Would that be workable?
It'd be workable. I would say that this report that'll come in January will be a little bit more clarity on the other needs of, I'm going to say line 1, for instance. We have an ATC system that will be fully functional in 2022. We only have trains to get us to 2026, and then we'll be over capacity on line 1 and not have achieved the abilities of the ATC system. So we will identify that for you in the report in 2027 to help with the decisions of this board.
Including, I think that was already sort of Gantt charted backwards to you must order by.
That's correct. We will lay out that schedule.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I think that's it. I did have a question about the marginal cost of an additional e-bus versus a diesel bus. So I know what they cost, you've told us that previously, but I had not contemplated the capital cost that would be incurred, because I noticed there's a line item for the charging systems, e-bus charging systems of it may not be the whole of it, but 188 million. So does somebody, I sense, given you don't need charging systems and we have diesel delivery systems already, that it's going to be a significant amount per bus. Do we know what that number is, so that when we're budgeting, every time you buy an e-bus, there's an implicit expenditure in capital that may not be there for diesel? So what is the difference? Because it's wonderful to do things, but you should know what they cost.
Through the chair, or to the chair, the incremental cost of electric bus over hybrid is just under $300,000. It's expected to fall significantly over the next 5 years on the per bus basis. That does not include the charging infrastructure. The charging infrastructure is an additional $115,000 per bus over this 10-year plan, except that investment lasts perhaps 50 to 100 years. For the first 10 years, and then it will drop down significantly after you made the initial investment. $940,000.
40,000. So it costs more than an electric bus.
No, so electric is 1.2.
1.2.
Yes.
1.2 plus how much capital cost then?
118,000 roughly.
Okay.
119,000.
So that's interesting. I didn't know.
But the 119,000 is
I had not
the.
factored that into my thought process,
Yeah.
that total cost. Okay, thanks. I think Councillor Bradford has a motion from Chair Robinson, who I hope is watching and we're thinking about her. We better do what she says.
Thanks. So
Ellie?
Through the chair, just want to move this motion on behalf of Chair Robinson. We all saw the letter that she shared with us last night, and I believe it's online now. I want to send best wishes for the treatment, and we always feel her absence, especially on these budget pieces. But it's commendable and remarkable that she still has the time and energy to move all this stuff forward. So we're very grateful. I think as you heard in my questions today, we have significant pressures on our budget, and this recommendation is really with some of the tools that we have available coming forward in our budget on the city's end this year to take an opportunity to do some accelerated vehicle procurement planning with recommended key investment priorities from the TTC. The motion is really detailing with the capital side, which is the traditional model of how we fund things here at the city with respect to transit. But, you know, as I was alluding to earlier, we're definitely going to have to find a more robust way to take care of the operating. The motion here is really directing staff to come back to us, and you heard in Councillor Carroll's questions, it's got to be specific. So how much, when we're doing it, what are the priorities, and what are the options for actually doing that? And I think our CEO understands that, and that's what he'll be coming back with. That way, in the January meeting, we can actually make our recommendations to council in support of the city capital budget, because that's where the dollars for this stuff is going to come from. It is going to be a city council capital budget decision, and tying it specifically to the city building levy. It's also going to give us a framework to approach the provincial and federal governments with some more specificity. So, you know, we heard from deputants today, and it's abundantly clear. We have a lot of pressure on our streetcar system. And we know that waiting until 2022 is going to be a real challenge for the riders and the system. Staff have looked at, I think, all of the priorities and put forward the best budget in front of us today. We do need to advance that to Budget Committee as part of our capital planning process, but it's in the context of the resources that are currently available to us. And that's a challenge. We also have heard from our CEO, you know, the challenges around the T1 subway cars. We have a $240 million unfunded just on SOGR to add 10 years of life to these vehicles. And then when it comes time to replace them, you know, that's another $1.6 billion to be able to do that. So, you know, these challenges are not something we are going to solve today in this budget cycle or the next year or the 10-year life of our capital plan. And that's why we really do need to think of rethink the cost structure and how we actually make this work. So again, hope you'll support the motion. We do need to move this forward. I appreciate the chair's work on this. And again, once we have those priorities, investment priorities, again, on the subway, on the bus, on the streetcar, we can use city council to tie that to the city building levy and have recommendations through budget at the end of January. So thanks very much.
I understand Commissioner Carroll has another motion. Let's put it up.
Yeah.
Oh, you have a question on that motion? Sorry. Sure.
I'm also, along with Commissioner Carroll, not entirely clear how this fits in with what we're doing today. So I'm just wondering if you can clarify on behalf of our commissioner, our chair. So we are looking at finding out a little bit more about expenditures that we believe we need to make that are over and above what's in our current capital plan, and taking that in time for the city to bubble this up through their own systems and get it approved in time to be started as required in this upcoming fiscal. Is that right?
That's right. The plan as it is laid out today, the purchase of the vehicles, whether it's subways or streetcars or buses, it is contemplated, it is not funded. And so this is going to, the intention here is really to come up with a priority program for council then to use the city building levy to fund the procurement and purchase of those vehicles.
So in effect, we would have to be voting on the capital plan with some kind of amendment asterisk to it as,
Yes, and
as it has been submitted now.
And I think Councillor Carroll will provide us with that asterisk.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Councillor Carroll's motion, and she'll explain it, and then we'll go back to more speakers once we've got that up.
Okey-doke. Yes. What this does is really allow us procedurally, if we want to, once we've seen the results of this report, it allows us to tie them together. What I'm suggesting, because today we're going to adopt a 10-year plan, basically. So what I'm suggesting is that we approve it, but subject to the board's decision as it relates to that report that the chair has asked for. What it means is that if we get out of that report word that really we're better off ordering in 2020 as opposed to 2021, procedurally we would still have the ability to transmit quickly, albeit, but we would still have the ability to transmit an addendum to the budget we're adopting today to executive and to council. Sure, it would have to be quick, but this subject to leaves us able to do that. We may decide on that day that we're hearing what we want to hear and we feel more confident about 2021 and we receive that report and that's that. But if we wanted to take an action on that report and have it impact the 2020 budget, if we get details such that we really think we should be doing something based on the now city building levy funds, what does that do to the debt ceiling of the city, all the rest, we'd be able to take an action in addendum to what we'd be adopting today. That way, the nuts and bolts, if you'll pardon the pun, the key state of good repair work that we're adopting today, the fastest thing that happens, they're going to run out the door when we do this and really start calendarizing the budget. So the minute council gives them the money, they're ready to go. And I don't want to stop them from doing that work, but we may want to add something. And that's why I'm saying if we do the subject to, we have that. Now, why am I asking to do that? Well, I want to thank the younger deputants today for bringing up the headlines this morning, and we're kind of proud of it in our work in the Toronto Atmospheric Fund. That report is a wake-up call for everyone. Anything we can do in terms of emissions, we should do. And transportation is the biggest place we can do it right now in this city or anywhere in the GTA. But secondly, sticking our necks out, possibly front-ending an order. We've done it before. I thought maybe my memory is playing tricks with me. It was a long time ago. It was 2009 and everybody was tense. So I actually reached out and phoned people who aren't in this building before to say, am I remembering it correctly? We stuck our necks out to the tune of $700 million. Josie remembers that we did it in a very weird way in a hotel ballroom because there was a strike going on and we couldn't even meet in this building. It was a very dramatic point in time, so I thought, I think I'm remembering this, but am I? We knew this. Our ask had been crystal clear to the federal government and the province for a long time, and they weren't there. Were they getting any warmer? We didn't have a sense. We knew if we front-ended and we said, we have to proceed, this system needs this. Within a couple of months, they were on board 100% and happy to be cutting the ribbons on those cars because they, pardon the pun again, didn't want the train to leave the station without them. And so they were all on board, and that order was paid for a third. And I think we've reached the point, once again, where we have to look at doing that. Part of the reason we struggle is not really partisan. Governments at the federal and provincial level have fundamentally changed the way they do their accounting. And we as municipalities spent a couple of decades saying, stop giving us funds with strings attached. And what happens when you don't want the strings attached is they start to lose a sense of how our system that we're asking them to help us pay for works. They don't understand how it works. And so the neat and tidy little vehicle purchase programs that we used to have before, the very specific programs that you knew what they were and you could count on them and you knew when they expired, and so you started forming your next ask and you put some specificity in it and tried to program what specific new program would come next. We actually moved away from that, and now their mindset and their accounting system doesn't really match it. And we're going to have to get them back there. But in the meantime, we're just going to have to push when we reach these crisis points to say, this is what we need it right now. It's real specific, it's this basket here, we've wrapped a bow around it, here it is, just do this and everyone will love you. We're gonna have to work in that way until we can get them back to the point where we're saying to them, this is the system, please understand it. We're okay with strings attached. We just want to know what the strings are and that we can multi-year program and budget around them. I think we actually have to take them back to that type of partnership. But in the meantime, we got to get far more specific and I believe far more demanding. We're sticking our necks out enough to do extra taxation. We ought to be able to stick our necks out enough to say, and this is how we will spend it.
Okay.
Thank you. Those are my comments, and thanks for.
So I have a question of the mover and maybe of legal, because I want to understand what we're doing in passing this motion. So I'm going to ask Mr. Leck, and I just told him I was going to ask him the question. If we approve this motion, are we approving the budget? Because in my world, when you approve something conditionally, you haven't approved it. The condition has to occur. And again, I'm a citizen rep, so I'm going to defer to the collective experience of the councilors on whether that works within the city process. So can Brian Leck tell us, is this motion a conditional approval or an approval with a condition? If you get the
I
difference.
would interpret this just practically as an approval of the capital budget that you have before you with those recommendations. That goes forward with a reservation, subject to a possible add-on, which is the additional report that will come back to the January 27, 2020 meeting to deal with accelerated vehicle procurement. I don't characterize this as a deferment of the entire matter or as some other arrangement. I think the way that Commissioner Carroll has put it forward is appropriate.
So then effectively what we're doing is we're saying we want this envelope and we're warning you in a month's time we might ask for something more. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Now I understand it. Yeah, no, that's it. I needed to understand it procedurally. I understood what you were doing. I didn't understand it procedurally. Thanks. Any other speakers? That's interesting. So then I'm going to call the motions. So Commissioner Bradford's, the motion that was forwarded to us by Chair Robinson. Everybody had a chance to read that. And Commissioner Bradford's moving it, I guess. Is that what's happening here? Okay. All in favor? Unanimous. And the second motion. All in favor of that, subject to the description that's been given by Mr. Leck. And I think that's a wrap. The item is amended. Yes, actually, you have to approve the item as amended. Yes, so all in favor of the item as amended. Motion to adjourn, we're done.
Yeah.
Sure. So we're going to have to scrum probably.